Chapter 101 Progeny and Peas. Year 130. Strange how information is often volunteered when one's in a position of power. Across the world, many observe the freshlands rise, and are eager to make friends. I would not have called them allies, given their fickle nature, but for now, friendly to the freshlands. The temples are in conflict, of course. Political conflict, rather than actual war. Accusations appeared, perhaps from the kings and emperors, that the temples were dishonest. It's brewing for some time, but the Continental Tree Highway added fuel to the fire. Why do the temples demand our best forces, when the temples refuse to send their best Templars? I've seen Templars. But in our first war and the string of battles, there were just a few hundred, at most, 1,000 Templars. Templars. The temple's military arm. Quite similar to my Valthorns, and surely, they're better suited for anti-demon activity than actually fighting me. Unless their god marked me as some kind of enemy of the religion, and they get a boost fighting me. That makes sense too. Again, free informants seemed to suggest that the temples had considered it, but their own intel suggested that their Templars are ineffective against me. Simply put, the first few hundred Templars were sent on a suicide mission. The temples too did not know whether the Templars received any blessing or buff from fighting a non-demon enemy of the temple. Their common understanding was that the blessings applied only against demons. A common complaint, and at this point I was rather happy to be left alone. I didn't see the point in a war that proved nothing. There really was no outcome that's good as a whole. So what if the temples won? Have they given up on their best chance of reclaiming the rotted lands from the demonic corruption? The demonic corruption was weaker, after the Demon King's death. The last Demon King had recalled some of the demonic energies in the rotted lands to fight the heroes. The rotted lands may very well undo itself if each Demon King called on its residual demonic energy during the fight with the heroes. Perhaps that is how the world maintains its current state. It would take a string of rotted lands type explosions all over the world to terraform the entire world into Demonland. However, if the Demon Kings recalled the energies that power it, eventually the rotted lands would shrink. There's really no demolite left in the wreck. The representative council asked Kavio, and Kavio asked me. Both locations. Eon had only explored Sabnok's location, as it is older and the corruption was weaker. The place of the Demon King's corpse had been thoroughly destroyed. I made trees through the area last year, and even now, not a single demolite left. The heroes had really destroyed the place. Of course, I am quite embarrassed that it took me so long to put two and two together, but then, who knew? Demolite isn't just a great store of mana. It's also a good prison for souls. The two heroes were likely trapped in some kind of unique demolite. Is the Demon King harvesting souls too? Or only certain kinds of souls? Our war potential would be greatly improved by having demolite weep only. After the great exhaustion of the demolites in the last few decades ago, a new attainable source would be great. The heroes didn't like demolite. I recalled a conversation between the heroes about the perils of demolite mining. The global demolite supply, which powers a small fleet of high-speed cruise ships, airships and so on, have been heavily affected by demolite shortage. Partly because during the Sabnok era, some of the demolite was magically turned into greater demons. Then, the two subsequent Demon Kings' corpses were unharvestable due to the overwhelming presence of hex. It's the equivalent of poisoning a productive oil well. It didn't help that the airships were unusable in the rotted lands. Demolite would interact with the demonic energies and behaved erratically, sometimes exploding. The terrain itself, hostile, meant if something went wrong, they would crash in demon hybrid-infested territories. Darn. But wait, if the demonic influence is weakening, would we be able to use demolite? I had the Valthorns send an exploratory delegation to the site of the Demon King Sabnok's fight. Other than the heroes, it's the first time someone's been here. So this is it. Where the Demon King fell and Emperor Harris made his mark on the world. Ferris said. Harris was naturally the most famous of the five who survived. Even if they all finally died. I am more interested in where he died. Edna said. The landscape was apocalyptic. There were massive holes and gashes on the ground that 4 decades did not heal. Only recently some of that damage was beginning to undo itself. Still, it's a place where the Demon King and heroes fought, and so the air and ground is unsettled, disturbed by the pain that this land once saw. Though I managed to remove the demonic corruption from this location, and the ground is still poisoned from magic. Too much magic was used here. Here, magic itself is weak. Not a nice place for a mage, as they would find their magic less potent. Maybe in a few decades, the residual drain on magic will fade, and this place will return to normalcy. Our briefing suggested that these places were always filled with demolite. It's been 4 decades. Maybe the heroes mined all of them already. As I pushed more and more of the demonic sludge away, it revealed a battered terrain. There were huge underground holes, caves that were made out of magical blasts. We could tell from the round circular shape of the caves, the smooth edges that indicated something annihilated everything in its path. Ferris was most affected by the devastation. The perils of a Eonic great druid, their emotions are very much affected by the condition of the land. He would witness a massive crevice, and head pause, touch the ground briefly. You all right? Edna walked over. There were many other Valthorns. They checked the area thoroughly for any potential magical items. Ferris had to pause. Not really. This landscape, it weighs on me. Huh. A druid in some ways can be considered 3 main branches to its power. Trees and animals, wind and water, and lastly earth. Ferris explained. Our connection to these 3 branches can be said to be almost equal at first, depending on our class, though we are usually more known for our connection to trees and animals. There are variations across classes and teaching schools, of course. Some druids are pure tree only. I believe my Eonic druids are more tree focused, though Ferris is an Eonic great druid, should be similar. Edna got it instantly. Ah, so the earth's pain speaks to you. Something like that, Ferris said. Not a nice feeling. Edna smiled and teased her friend and compatriot. It's like being sensitive, I suppose. Ferris hit her with his stick. The next location I wanted to explore was where Guiwang, Harris and all died. I witnessed their death, of course, and the massive explosion left a large crater. That explosion destroyed the Demon King, and any trees I had in the area. Since then, the area has been inaccessible due to a perpetual firestorm. Magic storm. Edna and the Valthorns observed the terrain. Residual magic. It'll calm down eventually. Maybe in a few years. It doesn't happen all the time, though, which is strange. It's as if the gods rolled a dice whether there will be a magic storm, or not. We'll have to wait for it to calm down. I mentally spoke. There are days when the firestorm weakens a little. Maybe there's demolite in there. Dash. Multiple kingdoms submitted their bids, despite the protests from the temples and so on. Some did so secretly. They didn't want to publicly declare to the temples that they were looking for alternatives. The offers were interesting. Our invitation to bid went out quite generally, that I was looking to create a transcontinental path across the Rotted Lands. Some kingdoms offered their princesses for marriage. Some offered a cut in taxes. Some outright offered control of their entire army. The representatives sat down and evaluated the offers. What's the point of this? One rather cynical representative asked. In the end, Eon's the one that decides, right? Kavio nodded. Eon had agreed to 3 potential alliances, and he had said he would decide on 2 of them. The last one will be for us to decide. The reason I did this was simple. Jasmine, from her observation of the people, and Patrick's mental reading had indicated that the council was growing weary. They had great authority over the lesser matters, but I had sensed that they were feeling left out of the greater direction of the Freshlands. Letting have a say in the big things would help, I guess. I watched their thought bubbles. They were all thinking whether I am serious, or whether this is a test. Kavio, had you ever thought of marrying? I telepathically spoke to the representatives present. Kavio's face paled instantly. Eon, you don't mean. Some of the kingdoms offered marriages. Certainly, our representatives should be more than worthy and deserving of the station. Their minds spun, and I detected some horniness among the representatives present. Some of them are nobles, being the delegates of their parents who rule their cities or domain. Some are elected representatives from their home state. There's some variation in how this station is perceived by the local rulers. Some view this as a key training ground before they return home to take over from their families. Some houses send their lesser children here, while their first sons are back home, actively training. I considered that this would make these representatives not so loyal, since now they would have the input and influence of these faraway kingdoms. Their wives, or husbands as it may, will use them as their door to communicate with me. A reality of geopolitics. The Freshlands isn't just the Valley of Freaka anymore. I must have wisdom, and accept that it is possible to manage competing priorities and influences. Just like how there are trees in the lush tropics, to the cold, snowy areas of the high mountains, to the dry, vast steppes. The world is not just one type of environment. Trees adapt and evolve too, even if it seemed ever so slowly. People too, are different. The Freshlands is a growing, vast space. The ways and means of a city-state, and that of an empire should be different. The representatives had days of serious debate. There were about 72 representatives now, as the inner freshlands had grown to 20 over segments. There's also delegates from the 6 ports, and then the representatives of the surrendered or allied kingdoms. Perhaps the hand should be offered to the high representative of the 6 ports. Or the hand of the kingdoms. It was a mess, and I didn't pay much attention to it. Each representative wanted something for their home state. After all, only one of the 3 spots would be chosen by the representatives. Dash. Glad you're not Kavio's place anymore. Yvonne smiled and tapped Jura's shoulder. Yvonne is almost level 70 as a trainer master. Totally. Jura nodded. I may be at Warlord, but dealing with squabbling nobles is really tiring. I'd rather be fighting. Greater hybrid champions. My elite Valthorns were almost capping out too. Edna was at level 78 as an Eonic Grand Knight, and Ferris was level 76. Many others were in their level 60s. They still had regular expeditions into the Rotted Lands, but these days, it's harder to find champion-class demon hybrids to fight. So, their growth accordingly slowed. Instead, many started to moonlight as adventurers, fighting other monsters that spawn in the Freshlands. According to our constitution, I had mandated security for certain designated routes. Beetles would patrol those places, and so these areas are safe. Monsters, however, still frequently happen, and magical anomalies, lesser necromancers and nuisances were left to adventurers to deal with. It was a concession for the adventurers' lobby group. Are you level 100 yet? Yvonne asked. Nope. Still at level 94. Jura answered. But honestly, it's not a cap issue. It's just a lack of suitable opponents at this level. Maybe you could just dive into a dungeon by yourself and destroy them single-handedly. There are no dungeons in the Freshlands. Ian's presence had ensured that. All the dungeons are outside of the Freshlands. An unfortunate turn of events is that my overwhelming presence had prevented the growth of naturally spawning dungeons, so the Freshlands doesn't have dungeons. This was a problem for adventurers, of course. Like, what proper fantasy empire doesn't have adventurers? But if there are no dungeons, then the number of adventurers and their quality would naturally be lower. I was aware of this issue for some time. It's just that, well, I could only focus on a few things at a time. Dungeons are natural events created from magical accumulation. The presence of trees, and my roots that extend everywhere, essentially drains magic and prevents too much magical energies from accumulating. Instead, the magic is distributed, and accumulated in forests instead. So, the forests and jungles of the Freshlands have stronger monsters, on average. Wolves, birds and all that are generally larger, stronger, and more likely to have magical features. Some even have Eonic variants, and I can give these Eonic monsters instructions, though they may not always obey it. Most of these forest monsters are territorial, so they stay within the forests, and coupled with the forests being protected territories, they are rarely encountered by the general populace or adventurers. I am conflicted. If I want to strengthen adventurers, they'd have to fight stronger monsters. In the Freshlands, it's either I find a way to create a dungeon where stronger monsters can spawn, or let these adventurers fight these Eonic monsters. But I don't want to. I am generally fond of these fellow forest creatures. We can use the adventurers to cull populations of monsters that have grown too large. Currently, Trevor manages the population of the monsters in the forests. If they are too big, he would put them down, with an army of beetles. I still feel conflicted, but really this is a short-term solution. Population cullings of large packs will not be sustainable, nor will it give a lot of quests for these adventurers. Dash. The representatives eventually settled on one of the kingdoms which offered 3 princesses, a large amount of trade, and a regular payment. I still had to decide on the other 2. Which I soon regretted. I stared and contemplated all the choices, and decided I wasn't very good at making decisions. Patrick, Trevor, Dimitri. Give me a hand. I mean, a thought. Certainly. There was some buzzing for a few weeks, and my artificial mind soon gave me a presentation. I felt like I was the CEO who was given a briefing on what's the best decision to make. We have evaluated the following proposal bids and have shortlisted the following 5 kingdoms for your consideration, Master. Trevor started. He was the oldest of the artificial minds, so somehow he's like in charge. The combined bid by the twin kingdoms of Ilisar and Elena's are our first choice. They offered 4 children of the 2 kings as potential marriage partners. They also have access to 4 large precious gem mines that they've agreed to offer 15% to us, and their location is close to the northern rivers. They have had a history of war with their neighbors, and their 2 larger neighbors have always wanted to conquer them. They've failed in the past due to the two kings were of a high level, and they have a small circle of strong generals. But their strongest king died of a demon wound a few years ago, and the new king is weaker. I mentally nodded. Alright, they are weak and they have every reason to cooperate with us. They also have gem mines, which I need for upgrades. They are also a landlocked nation, so they really need this alternative trade route. Their traders are frequently targeted by river pirates, especially once the ships travel to the neighboring country's land, and so the main river that runs through their kingdom is an unreliable source of trade. Alright, they are desperate. The second best bid, in our opinion, is from the kingdom of Typesok. Again, they offered 5 children of the royal family of our choice. Patrick, Trevor, maybe cut out the part on the children. Really irrelevant to me. I believe they are relevant for our Valthorns and politically, we may dangle them as rewards for the loyal nations. Trevor said, if we must maintain loyalty throughout the vast territory, it would be good to use these as rewards. Really? What? Is this like a game of Total War or EU4 or Crusader Kings where I matchmake royalties with deserving generals in order to maintain loyalty? Seriously. As such, the number is important. Trevor continued. Jasmine had also corroborated that many nobles frequently fight over good marriage candidates. As such, there is political and economic value from these marriage candidates. But where do we come in? We control the trade routes, Master. The wealth generated by the trade routes is a button we can turn on, or off. Jasmine, Trevor and Patrick all paused. Also, obtaining marriage candidates is also crucial, as they are worth it for the potential hereditary skills. Hereditary skills. Alright, what in the world is that? From our analyses of nobility, a common trait that allowed nobles to retain their power and influence, despite the world's constant change, is the ability to pass on certain skills and benefits to their progeny. What? That sounded extremely familiar. Have I had this conversation before? Was it some nobles that spoke to me about inherited skills? Master, our proposal required that we incorporate the skill sets of nobility to produce stronger offspring. Nobles and various races have been seen demonstrating the effects of inherited skills, perhaps it's slightly stronger physical strength, or just natural learning ability, or slightly faster leveling speed. Why did I not know of it? Not all nobles possess the ability to pass down abilities. Only some do, and those that never talk about it. And we can read minds. Patrick responded. Some of the nobles have been hiding this hidden advantage. They don't even tell their children, until their children gain a similar skill when they reach adulthood. Some of it is just the ability to evade negative traits or just generic healthiness. Go on. We've also discovered that some royal families have certain dynasty abilities that bless their entire lineage. Damned. Even in the world of levels, the wealthy and powerful have a way to rig the game. Seriously. As such, the children of the royals have incredible value. Do you think it's possible to spawn a super noble, then? I mean, if the inherited skills can be passed down, and the inherited skills can come from both father and mother, surely the nobles would have been accumulating advantages over time. Isn't this like how One for All works? From our observation, yes, it's already been done. The nobles and royalties intermarrying suddenly makes a huge amount of sense now. But from our observation, these gifted children mostly turn overconfident and usually die young before they ever fulfill their advantages and potential. I see. There's a very Mendelian quality to this entire thing. Patrick and Trevor's proposal of mixing the royals with our elites reeks of geneticism. My soul forge alters an individual. This is altering successive generations via selective breeding. I understand Master's concerns, but the effects of skills are real. The advantages are clear. Creating super soldiers via selective breeding is possible in the long run. It is fundamentally not much more different from selective alteration of beetles. In a world of magic and levels, we're still unable to escape the powers of inheritance and inequality. Magic and levels amplifies inequality. It gives legitimacy over one's superior station over another. Damn it. Just fucking GD damn it. If I go down this path, eventually I would be selectively breeding my citizens to create super soldiers. Master, I need a moment. I've already taken one step into that path, by training Valthorns from their very young age. This is an extension of that thought, by ensuring the quality and potential of the Valthorns are high, even before they are trained. But there's clearly a conflict here. Valthorns are mostly children who are without families. We've taken them in and trained them. Give them a family, and skills. Give them a purpose in life, if they didn't have one, a cause and goal to fight for. Is there a line I should cross here? I've killed thousands. Tens of thousands. Master, I need more time to contemplate this. I can accept the fact that hereditary skills exist. In fact, it makes all the sense that it should. A parent's love for their children may manifest itself as skills. The kings and nobles of the world have been doing this all this while, master. Patrick interjected. We are just taking it a step further. It's the difference between free-range chicken and massive broiler farms, Patrick. I need to think. Chapter 102 Tree Arch. Year 131. On the proposals, I had agreed to the top two choices that Trevor and Patrick proposed. For the marriage candidates, I had advised that we will decide on that at a later date. With the three winners decided, I started work on my long overdue Great Tree Road. I was already halfway to the other side anyway, when we reached the center of the Rotted Lands. Now for the remaining half. The Rotted Lands energy has become weaker. Right now, it behaves quite like creeper ooze. There's still some push and inertia, but I've noticed the expansionary element has been slowly disappearing. That said, hybrids will continue to spawn as long as the terrain remains covered with demonic substances. The god of spawning animals, monsters and plants doesn't particularly care what is spawned, so long as they fit the terrain. It's a bit of a runaway process. Maybe some demons or hybrids, if they could think, would see me like I am an evil highway builder, destroying and encroaching on their habitat with this highway right through their homes. On a macro level, it's like how roots break rocks or dirt apart. A root goes through it, and smaller ones gradually break it up. Some plants and trees don't like hard ground and soil, and requires worms and all to help loosen up the soil. Anyway, I started the building of the treeway, and the entire process of spawning subsidiary trees and giant attendant trees took 7 months. Along the way, there were large parts that were submerged under the demonic sludge. Ancient ruins coated with demonic goop, cities that were somehow not entirely destroyed by the sludge. Caves, rivers. There were many interesting sites and locations along the way, and I made a note to Patrick and Trevor to return to them. We need another artificial mind. One to control access to the path. Trevor suggested, and I nodded. I had capacity anyway. I named my new mind in charge of the highway that branched to the 3 selected allies, Trent. I wanted Terrific, but what would the parents think of that name? So Trent. Hi Trent. You're in charge of security and trade taxes of the treeway. Alert us and escalate any unusual matters. We mentally linked up, and soon he was on his way. He's been given a large regiment of beetles to ensure the security of the path. The Council of Representatives made a request for a formal party to celebrate the new path that cut across the entire Rotted Lands. But it's not ready yet. Although there is a corruption-free path, the terrain along the path isn't exactly clean. There's still a need to build roads, build bridges, build rest stops. A lot of construction work needs to be performed before the path is ready for use. Some of this construction should start from the other side, since it didn't make sense for a construction team to travel all the way across the Rotted Lands. That was a 2 to 3 month journey if one walked. I watched as the other kingdoms, these new partners of ours, send their builders and armies into the new path. It's rather tiny for a path. Big enough for a few wagons, for sure. But it's so jarring. It's like someone planted a row of trees on both sides and now there's a path through the Rotted Lands. Hush, a lord on a horse said. His Majesty instructed that we build whatever's needed for the trade route. This path will relieve our trade issues. It's probably calculated to be of a certain size. You can't march a big army through it. The builders talked. They clearly had no concept of being secretive. The path meandered through the Rotted Lands. There were natural hills and mountains underneath all the demonic sludge, and it didn't make sense to cut a straight road and force traders up and down the path. I recalled highways from home usually tried to maintain a steady angle or slope, so I wanted to do exactly that. I watched and admired how builders made bridges from nearby rock and stone. They didn't dare to chop down my subsidiary trees, so they improvised and used other kinds of materials instead. Still, given how big and long the path was, the builders' skills would actually improve traveling speed. They needed a lot of time to build, and on the Freshlands side, we've sent our best builders to work on it. I even gave out a few expert builder class seeds to the leaders of the build, to ensure that the path was built as fast as possible. Because of the long distances, there was also a need for smaller towns. Back in the days of the Silk Road, I recalled that various cities would spring up along it. Trevor and Patrick had made some projections and calculated that since it took 2 to 3 months to walk from one end to another, horses and various mounts would cut that time by a third, to less than a month. So, there needed to be at least 4 large-sized rest stops along that path, equivalent to 1 week distance horse ride, or 3 weeks of walking, and another 12 to 16 medium-sized smaller towns in between, such that it took about a few days to walk from one town to another. Back to the builders, they would need a long time to finish the road. A rudimentary basic road with a simple bridge would be ready within a year, but it seemed like the kingdoms, and also the Freshlands all talked about multiple upgrades, like bigger reinforced bridges, and proper towns. The territory on Rotterdam's Pass belongs entirely to Eon. Kavio repeated to the envoys. But he had agreed to all 3 kingdoms that each of these 3 allied kingdoms that they are allowed to set up one large city, and 3 smaller towns in these designated locations. It is important that the administration of these cities and towns be made clearly aware to obey the constitution of the Freshlands, or risk destruction. Envoys from all the 3 kingdoms were the first to make the trip through the Rotterdam's Pass, even though the builders had not finished building. I witnessed how envoys have rather impressive skills. One had the ability to make his horse jump across the entire ravine multiple times, and another envoy could travel for days without rest. It was easier to communicate and coordinate construction and plans with an envoy from our end. It seemed that Kavio and the council had also sent envoys of our own to the other sides. It was better that they were here. Patrick's abilities quickly revealed their multiple objectives. One which featured in all 3 envoys was to assess my strength. Envoys are pretty much spies, and they all had some kind of level sensing ability. It's important when dealing with other kings and lords, since the level of the other king revealed the kinds of power they had. Domain has blocked level sensing ability. Well, thank you. It's really convenient that my domain blocked most of these things. My ability was blocked, the envoy said privately to his colleague. Each kingdom sent about 5 to 10 people to Freshka. You should know what that meant. They were most cooperative. The road would only be ready next year. Even with the expert builders on the job. There was also a second round of migrationary movement, as we opened up certain sites for the future cities, which will be directly managed by the FFA. Migrate into the Rotterdamlands. Some looked at a chance to make it rich. Some saw it like insanity. I mean, all of them were probably insane when they accepted this plan, but there are second-generation citizens of the Freshlands, where it was their parents who made the move into the Freshlands. The Freshlands was founded about 20 plus years ago, some of them who came had children here, and now those children are young adults. That essentially made them second-generation Freshlanders. A lot of them grew up in the relative comfort and safety of the Freshlands, so the idea of moving deeper into the Rotterdamlands is weird and strange. I suppose one generation's suffering does not transmit to the next. Some of the nations neighboring our new allies were unhappy, but they didn't dare to risk my wrath. They've heard of the stories of the 6 ports, and they were quickly focused on fortifying their own home cities. Some, though, were quick to secretly extend an olive branch to our new allies. A spy from Ava was present too. We're actively trying to delay a second crusade. The spy spoke to a small audience. Essentially me, Kavio, Jura and some of the Valthorn elites like Lovis, Edna and Ferris. Lovis was lower level than Edna and Ferris, she only received her Spearmaster class a few years back, and she's in her mid-60s. I believe we may be able to buy some time until the next Demon King. Essentially, you're telling us that there will be a crusade after the next Demon King. Kavio frowned. How's that a convincing argument? The spy shrugged. Sometimes, the best we can do is to delay the fighting. The triumvirs of Ava will not publicly renounce the war. And what if we publicly call you out on it? Then it will be a real war. It's in our best interest to have this stalemate. The priests get to retain their divine duty and obligations, but no one actually has to die. There's going to be smaller skirmishes and rebellions. There will be death. The triumvir's presumption of a peaceful stalemate is ridiculous. Kavio said. It is. The spy and envoy nodded. But it is what it is. Rubbish. I said telepathically to everyone present, and the spy's face paled. Like dominoes, a few of the kingdoms neighboring our new allies were quick to reach out for communication. They wanted a similar arrangement, lest they let their neighbors benefit. It made no sense to agree to them. They didn't have the balls to submit a bid, and so, why should I give them any arrangement now? There should be an exclusive period where only these 3 allied nations get the benefit, since they decided to make the investment. The temples were already in full swing, trying to sow discord and rebellion. A few temple men, realizing that attacking me was useless, decided to target those allied to me. They targeted the nobles, the lords and dukes, the kings. A massive campaign to sow hate against the ruling government, simply because they are associated with me. It's quite intelligent. The rulers after all don't have an iron grip and a big brother over their population, and now, Their own citizens are fed all these accusations from the temples. These accusations amplified the present dissatisfaction. The Freshland's first victory and the subsequent shifting allegiances relocated many people, and add to that, there were the surrendering soldiers, few hundred thousands who then increased the strain on the cities and villages that received them. It was something that slowly built up over time. As the Freshlands expanded, natural stratification and fault lines emerged. There are those from the core cities, those who lived in the original segments of the Freshlands, and then there's the newly incorporated and assimilated kingdoms. Each had different views of each other, and it could be something harmless like one city's citizens viewing another city's citizens as weird, or strange. All these little differences, suspicions and varying cultures were a formula for conflict. It is normal. As species expanded, many would come into conflict with other species who occupied the same niche. Cultural differences are a source of conflicts, and the Council of Representatives, as diverse as they are, still cannot allay all these accusations and suspicions. People just naturally formed in groups and out-groups. Us, and them. Rebellion broke out in a few of the neighboring states. It was something Jasmine predicted from her observations. My ability to watch and observe these neighbors are quite restricted, since many have made fortified roads and plazas, and trees are mostly in gardens and designated avenues. Still, we had a good feel of the mood, their discontent and unhappiness. I had worked out a plan with the War Council. They knew something like this was going to happen. In fact, everyone knew. Even the kings themselves all knew that a rebellion was about to break out. Even regular citizens who had a bit more general knowledge could see it coming. It was that obvious. Those cultural fault lines flared up. In some cases, it took a racial turn. Humans versus non-humans. Elves versus centaurs. Some kings had skills to suppress rebellion and disloyalty, and were quick to do it. The weaker kings didn't, and so a rebellion occurred. They would use their army to suppress them. I decided not to participate unless I was invited to. For those kings were able to control their kingdoms, we quickly offered assistance to help resolve the underlying forces that triggered their unhappiness. It's usually rather simple stuff, like a lack of food, or poor harvest, or just ill treatment from their local lords. Things that a wagon or two of food can sometimes help solve. In a way, it was just regular hearts and minds programs to help diffuse the social pressures that exist in these kingdoms. Abundance helps to allay the concerns of scarcity. Many of these population groups are barely self-sufficient. Still, abundance would never satisfy the greed of mortals. The only way to ensure aid and supplies are sufficiently shared is if I have people everywhere to distribute these resources in a reasonable manner. We're going to expand the Valtrian Order's social services arms to all our allied states. All of them. Lofen, of course, was overwhelmed. But by now the Valtrian Order was a massive institution, and has grown it to almost 40,000 people. There are numerous Valthorns who have more defensive or supportive skills who could assist in widespread social and community work. Even if it's simpler stuff like improving crop yields, or fixing bad housing, to the regular kinds of social work performed by the temples, which are healers and rituals. We need a massive priest training system and support system. We can't just send our people to all these neighboring kingdoms and expect them to succeed without a robust logistic network. So, the Valtrian Order went into a hiring drive. We had to expand the size of our workforce if we wanted to try and overcome this propaganda attack. There's two aspects to it. Resolving the short-term issue of a rebellion, and then tackling the long-term issue of what caused and fed the rebellion. This wasn't a conventional war. This was a culture war. A group of 2,000 priests and various other social workers headed for the hotspots. Places where Jasmine and Patrick's social models indicated that there may be unrest. It feels a little Minority Report-ish that we're sending social workers before something bad happens, but in a way, that's preventive work, right? No one riots overnight. It's a culmination of decades of distress. Similarly, allaying those feelings of unwellness would also require dedicated care and attention. I could spawn more tree of prayers everywhere. Those trees can reduce the general stress levels and induce a sense of calmness and serenity. But it doesn't work if they are already mad. If they were in my valley, I could be even more obtrusive and use psychic and dream attacks on them, but that's like using a hammer to cut a cake. So, a massive hiring drive. Once I have the numbers, they need to be educated and trained. Let's set up a massive priest training facility. I mentally told myself. Since these gods treat me as a fellow deity, even if I am evil, it was time to go on overdrive and behave like a proper religion. A culture war can only be defeated by another culture. If I want to sustainably push back these enemy cultures, I must first convert all those in the Freshlands to my culture and religion. Else, one edict or divine message, and it'll have large swaths of my population rebellion. That is not acceptable. I marked a hilly area next to Freshka and started work. A large area of forests was merged with multiple giant attendant trees. It was going to be like my Vatican, my holy see, and I wanted the area to be visible even from afar. I used my powers to make these the tallest giant attendant trees ever made, and it took about a month of working and shaping with my woodshaping. It's easier, since I was working with bigger things. I made housing, lecture halls, training rooms, multiple ritual rooms, places for guests and all that. I called on 10 of the most experienced and high-leveled Eonic priests. I have been extremely pleased with your efforts in the past few years to counter the propaganda spread by our opponents. The 10 all knelt in a circle around a tree of prayers. This was the same meeting area. It is time that you are rewarded for your faith and loyalty. There were 5 men and 5 ladies. All 10 of them received either Patriarch of Eon or Matriarch of Eon. These were upgraded Eonic priest classes, which should empower all their regular priests' abilities to a greater degree. They ate the fruits containing the classes, and instantly, all 10 of them screamed. Their bodies shook, and I sensed their spirits glow brightly. Their skin turned slightly greenish, and all their eyes gained a green ring that glowed. One of them, he was a middle-aged man who served mostly in the southeastern segments, was first to rise. O Eon, our great patron of the land, we have received your blessings. All of them rose, their bodies healthier and stronger. I sensed the presence of my domain flowing into them slightly. Does my domain choices influence the kinds of power my priests possess? But no matter. Rise, my council of arches, for the weight of expanding our faith rests in your hands. The 10 rose, and sat in a circle. Together, they seemed to emit a physical glow. The other gods deny my presence in our world. I said, I will need you to push them back. My first order is to set up the school of Theology, where all the priests will be trained. My second order is to secure the faith and loyalties of all nations allied to the Freshlands. The 10 answered in unison, their voice seemingly echoing like a choir. We receive your commandments. Then I summoned the Eonic priests, for all over. If I wanted to be a true global religion, it was time to have a proper structure, a unified code of principles, and well, power. Generic priests get the usual abilities: heal, cure wound, some barrier and shield powers. This is where I let my new 10 patriarchs and matriarchs to run the show. Chapter 103 Branching Thoughts. Year 132. This is the third batch of prospective priests and students. A priest gestured to the patriarch, as a group of 50 walked into the room. They all bowed, and were quickly given a short interview. A test of their faith, as the patriarch made them recite the constitution of the Freshlands. Then a quiz on my abilities. It was a strange feeling, but at the same time, I was numb. The school of Theology had to expand quickly in order to meet the need for social and cultural influence in the region, so this school had to grow quickly. Conflict and confusion naturally emerged. Speed meant planning was not proper, and it seemed the 10 Dakarchas quickly had different opinions of how to expand the school. They soon squabbled over things like what was the right way to pray, what was the right way to do things, and their methods. Dakarchas, because it was 10 patriarchs and matriarchs. I summoned them all and they all presented their case. Each patriarch came from a different place, and there was some diversity in races too. One of them was a half-elf, another was a centaur, another a treefolk. As such, each had different areas which they felt was important in their faith. For some, it was caring for the land. That meant they were both priests and druid. For another, it was about the birth and death of souls, and the ceremonies. While they seemed like they could mutually coexist, their arguments would devolve into arguments about what is of a higher value or semantics. For example, one of them, in their practice of honoring those who have died, would bury the body in the earth, and plant a tree on them. Yet, because the bodies of mortals sometimes carry sickness or poison. For one, it is still right to bury them. For the other, caring for the earth takes precedence, so the sick or poisoned corpse should be burned, or at least processed before burying. It's often little but fundamental differences in which values hold strong, that created these conflicts. They are small conflicts, in the sense that they can still live with each other, and operate within the same area, but certainly it is an ideological difference. In a way, it's like different teachers in a school, each thinking their own subject is the most important one. But at the same time, I didn't want to clamp down on these differences in opinion. I didn't see myself as a founder of an orthodoxy where there is only a single source of truth or opinion. It certainly wasn't aligned with how plants evolved and adapted to their surroundings. Thus the faith I had must be able to evolve, and it was only right that the willingness to accept differences of opinion be set up at the start. But at the same time, a faith that could evolve was also one that would squabble, and eventually break apart. Yet, as I pondered this problem, whether I set it up or not, faith will naturally evolve as the greed and instincts of man meant the rules will shift over time. It is only proper that I set up the mechanics to do so early on, and fine-tune it, since I am after all, their deity. So, to the 10 Dekarchas, I decided to allow each of them to lead their own departments. A student would rotate and go through all of them, over the 2 to 3 years of training as a priesthood. There would be a debate, and a voting system as the 10 Dekarchas would have to decide. In time, I saw that I'd probably expand the Dekarchas into a proper council of high priests, but that would be in the near or far future. For now, a departmental approach seemed better. I mean, I could in theory agree with any of the 10 and decide that as canon, but a tree exists in the real world, and the proper way to do is to let the priests carry it out and observe the consequences of such beliefs. Then, apply corrective guidance as and when necessary. One thing I was quick to notice amongst the mortals of the world was that they didn't believe neither in God's omnipotence nor omniscience. The concept of a one God of everything does not exist, simply because of the visible divinity of lesser deities and the higher gods. So it comes off rather strangely to me that in this aspect, these people are progressive. They can accept that the gods can change their minds, and frequently, in their prayers to the divine, often try to negotiate with the gods. Even if it's futile, is it because they've always lived in a world where there is an expectation of a pantheon of gods? And they seem to acknowledge, without much reservation, that gods have a limited scope of powers. Still, differences emerge from their different interpretations and priorities. It's only natural, and it's something I should let it run its course. In this period of tense peace, with the temple still planning for a second crusade, I continued to improve on our beetles and spiders. New assassin and anti-human variants, and higher range for my new artillery bomber beetles. They are larger, about the size of a giant beetle, and they move a lot slower. But, they can shoot out an acidic projectile that can travel a few hundred meters, so that makes them a proper ranged attacker. Even if they are absolutely defenseless otherwise. No matter. Little secret weapons I can use on the next crusade. Best to keep them hidden and only reveal them when really necessary. Horns enjoyed all beetle-related stuff, but I did notice he cared more for the beetles. Trevor and the other artificial minds were the ones driving the changes to the assassin spiders. I thought, I should make more assassin spider artificial minds, such that they act as my assassin generals. Jasmine was quick to support the idea and recommended that they be assigned to her, since she and Patrick coordinated the surveillance and monitoring of the denizens of the Freshlands. I wondered whether that was the right idea. What if Jasmine and Patrick made the wrong call and assassinated someone without truly checking? What if they killed someone who should be killed? I didn't think that outsourcing the business of killing was something I was willing to do. Not until I could trust their judgment, even if they have been shortlisting and compiling crimes on our denizens. I felt rather strongly that I should be the one deciding on whether they lived or died. At least, in assassination situations. In a war situation, as everyone present was a combatant, I am more willing to give my assistants free rein to decide. But in more covert and subjective situations, I don't think it's fair. Many people have rebellious and treasonous thoughts, but that doesn't mean they would all rebel, or would be disloyal. In fact, I would suspect anyone who never had that thought at all, because that meant they have never internally considered it. That generally meant their loyalty has never been tested, and as such, they may switch even when they seemed loyal all this while. So, I demanded a dossier for every suspected person. They've been graded on a framework and risk rated. I felt like this was some kind of risk rating for loans, or a little like the social credit scores, but, if I am the only one I trust to make this decision, then this is the best way to thin down the risk. Or we can focus on Freshka and the nearby countries. Trevor suggested. Based on the potential damage that these unfavorable people can cause in faraway places, it's rather limited. A distance weightage. That's a good point. Then let's do that. Only flag those who operate within the near valley zone. For those further out, only flag those as high risk, or a large movement, or have high magical power. With that, the list was shortened considerably. Trent, my artificial soul in charge of my intercontinental trade route, gave his weekly summary of the trades. It took a year, but the basic infrastructure for trade was finally ready and traders started taking the trade. They still had to deal with the issue of supplies and resources to make the month-long journey across the central area of the continent. For now, Only merchants with the right set of skills or teams made the journey. This was similar to the past, when New Africa was newly set up. The terrain then was unfavorable, many cities were destroyed by the demons too. So, the merchants that traveled from one city to another usually had some skills that allowed them to stretch their supplies a bit longer, or make their journey a little faster on less favorable terrain, or merchants that could boost or enhance their horses and carriages such that they could make it to the next town. Once more rest stops were built along the route, the trade volumes would naturally increase, as the route itself becomes easier. A natural evolution of trade. In fact, a train service from one end to another would also work, and I could naturally instruct beetles to act like long-haul trailers to move goods from one end to another. I mean, they were already a means of transport back in the days of New Africa, and it was time that I resumed their service. I decided to have Horns start research on dedicated truck beetles and trailer beetles. It just made sense. Giant truck beetles that haul goods across the continent. I just hope they don't accidentally bang into someone and reverse isekai them to another world. Still, an intercontinental state-sponsored beetle hauling service. Of course, there was a fee. I mean, the Valtrian order must be financed. Alternatively, the beetles could also act as supply trucks, to provide food supplies for the merchants on the route. We should price the beetles' services at a high point. We do not want to outcompete the pioneer batch of merchants. Kavio quickly suggested. I'll summon the Merchants Guild and we can develop some kind of pricing schedule. As time goes on and the route matures, we can bring down the prices. We must still let the pioneer batch make some profits. I pondered this for a moment and decided to agree. I wondered whether I should feed the capitalist elements of this world and let them gain power. But then, in this world, merchants do take very real risks with their lives. The protection of beetles like my own is very much an aberration. Master, have you thought of using our network of trees across the continent for trade arbitrage? We could easily make a profit using the price differences between the freshlands and those faraway kingdoms. I thought of that for a moment, and decided I did not want to compete with merchants. At least, not at the moment. I am a tree, and at the same time, I am also a singular point in growing government. I see my role as a facilitator and provider of infrastructure that cannot be replicated by individuals. I also am rather skeptical of a government playing the role of businesses, even though the Valtrian order did run different types of businesses to earn money and support its expenditure. No. In the end, we are a governing entity, not a business. Well, just charge fees and taxes. The first thing I needed to do was to set up 3 beetle stops, each one at the borders of the 3 chosen allied nations. These future truck beetles would not be able to communicate at all, so I would need the Valtrian order representatives to record orders and instructions, have them processed. Wait. How would they get orders? The merchants can't communicate with the beetles. Maybe we can have trees that receive messages. I pondered this question for a moment. All these while I've been relying on my artificial minds to run my operations, and essentially the beetles can only be ordered by them, or by Horns and the other beetle generals. They react by spying and observing, or in the days of New Africa, the beetles moved at regular routes and made scheduled stops, essentially like a bus service. I could repeat that, of course. If so, I could set up the beetles to depart on regular schedules and have the merchants work with a timetable. The Valtrian and Freshland representatives merely act as booking coordinators and allocate or match empty beetles to the merchants. While Kavio handled the discussions with the merchants, I zoomed in on the new planned border towns. Each of the 3 nations have begun setting up a small expeditionary force, builders, farmers and merchants being the first to make the journey, along with a small military entourage. There are beetles, but so far they've been hidden in the subsidiary trees. After all, there's really no reason for them to appear unless the hybrid demons attacked. At these designated town zones, the area I've reclaimed from the demonic corruption is larger, much larger to allow for some farming activity and buildings, and fortifications, if these nations deemed them necessary. I've essentially cut the rotted lands into multiple slices with this long route through the rotted lands, and it's only possible because of the weakened demonic energies. There's potential of using route tunnels to create a secret smuggling route. Patrick suggested. Well, hold that off until necessary. I responded. I am sure some of them have skills to detect tunnels and such. On the Freshlands side, we're also rapidly building up a new settlement, on the edges of the existing segment. It's meant to be the launchpad for trade through these new route, and there are some who would take up this challenge and opportunity. For now, the first batch of traders mostly bring high value, high margin goods. That meant jewelry, works of art, and artifacts. There's always an audience for this sort of good, and for the traders who have to travel light and fast, these were the best choices. These batch of traders have a lot on their hands, and part of their journey is sponsored by the merchant guilds of their home cities. It's an exploratory run. These traders would return with feedback on the difficulty of the journey, the kinds of prices and the demand for various goods, and what else they could buy. The freshlands have a lot of food, so that's something that we can sell in bulk. We're like fresh foods. Eon. A patriarch of the Eonic faith spoke privately. It's close to the end of the year. A question. Yes. Some of us have been debating whether we should expand some missions to the new lands as a result of the new trade routes. We asked Kavio about it, but he was not able to give a firm conclusion on whether the trade agreement included missions of faith. We believe that it is only right that we spread our faith to these new allies, but at the same time, we're not too sure whether our attempts will be viewed positively. Maybe. Speak to the merchants. That's a good point. The patriarch nodded and he arranged a meeting with the visiting merchants from the faraway kingdoms. I thought back to the older days of my studies. Should I use marriage and royal conversions into the faith as a way of expanding my power? I recalled some kingdoms used to marry their nobility and convert other kingdoms to their religions. Is that too manipulative as a religion? Should I go there? I paused. It's not the first of the many tough decisions I have to make. All these decisions are trade-offs, one way or another. I don't care for royals, but I cannot deny the influence of inherited abilities, or their powers to sway vast numbers. Having royal assent would make our priests and preachers have an easy job of winning this cultural war. But at the same time, am I not a hypocrite? I did not care for royals, and yet, should I agree to this whole royal marriage shtick, it's essentially giving them a lever of power. Hypocrite. In some places, maybe I'd be referred to as pragmatic, to make decisions based on what benefits I can derive. If I was human at this time, I'd go for a long run, or do some stretches. I instinctively stretched, and it felt like my senses stretched to encompass the entirety of the freshlands, as overwhelming and confusing as it sounds. It's like zooming out of a buzzing city and viewing it from high up, like an airplane. I've thought long and hard for some time. The issue of meddling with hereditary abilities and skills reeked of genetic engineering, and am I not robbing the young child of choice? Similarly, by pairing up royals for a skill advantage and also to proselytize these royals to my faith felt like an offense against that choice. But I have not been consistent either. Certainly I've changed my mind. Have I given the Valthorns a choice? Not really. I am aware of the huge ethical quandaries of child weapons. Am I prepared to sin all the way to hell and back, for that chance to find a path to heaven? Is there a middle ground where I can take, that still leads me to that end? Master. Trevor asked. We detected a lot of magical activity, from you. I seemed that as I zoomed out, I also drew on the magical energies of the freshlands. It was a strange feeling, but from this far away, I felt like, maybe I should go ahead with it. Sure, it's hypocritical. No, that's wrong. I must have a line I cannot cross. I must. If not, I'll eventually descend into viewing all the lives I sacrificed as nothing more as statistics. I forced myself to correct my earlier train of thought. It was a struggle, but I quickly called on my memories of pain, of destruction, of death, my memories of those who died around me. Then, memories that I did not recognize started flooding my mind. They were memories of those who lived here, the pain of losing a spouse, a child, a leg, a friend. So many strange new memories. It was like that moment when I processed the hex, but more real, more vivid, and yet also more nuanced. I could sense strong emotions: fear, anger, helplessness, bitterness, disappointment. It was strong, and from the valley, from Freshka. Master, you've activated my abilities, Patrick said, and I realized that those were the memories of those in Freshka. Their history and past. I saw them flash, and yet it didn't overwhelm me. It's just at the right pace, the right amount that I can still take in those feelings. It took a while, there were so many memories to go through. The first generation of settlers of the Freshlands had hard lives. Starvation, hunted by monsters, was very normal. It was a pain that still felt raw for many, even if it was just decades ago. Master. Trevor too intervened. The populace of Freshka is behaving strangely. They were in a state of daze, all of them. The sudden mind draw was like a psychic attack. My bad. I relaxed and let my psychic hold go. I felt my connection to them disappear. In a way, it wasn't unusual. As a tree in the center of a huge forest of trees that sprawled across the continent, each normal tree is like its own brain. It has its own senses, and very rarely, its own thoughts. They are often filtered out by my mental firewall, since it's mostly inane. This felt rather similar, like adding more trees into the network, only these trees have a far more developed thought process and more memories. I paused again. I have to walk a middle path, between a tree and man. The tree's aspect can get too macro, and the aspect of man tends to be emotional and micro. But I do wonder, is this pragmatism, or a form of enlightened dictatorship enabled by always-on surveillance and an ability to read minds? Maybe to the temples across the ocean, to them, I may well be a hive mind that has the entire Freshlands in thrall. Chapter 104 Matrimony. Year 133. The rifts opened. I sensed it, vaguely, my magic sensors detected fluctuations. But, nothing, at first. I wondered whether they are a group of invisible or stealthed demons, like the one that attacked the previous set of heroes. Quiet. Very, very quiet. Maybe they are not on our continent. If so, that would be a welcome relief. But then, which continent? No matter. Local matters first. Kavio struck a deal with the Merchants Guild for the establishment for a scheduled hauling arrangement between the new trading outposts, and goods began to flow. We charged very steep fees, so that those who made the trip themselves could still earn good margins. That worked, of course, since the beetles were free labor. They are sustained by the subsidiary trees which hosted them. That meant new goods, which was always fun. I spent time going through the new kinds of produce and output they made. Especially plants that were not native to this area of the Freshlands. I have yet to find any non-hybrid plants in the Rotted Lands, but these new trading partners are an entire continent away. Surely there are types of plants that are different, so, we were also potential customers. Jura helped to request for a catalog of plants native to those 3 new trading kingdoms, and from that, I increased my crop and herb varieties. Crop varieties increased. Unlocked cucumbers, capsicums, red barley and native black tomatoes. Herbal variants increased. Herbal patches will now spawn more types of herbs. New types of trees and plants too, some of which are not commonly found in the existing Freshlands. As a magical tree, I naturally have a boost to the growth of trees around me. The way this ability presented itself is by amplifying the growth speed of existing trees, amplifying and magically assisting the tree's seeds to spread, by mechanisms which I have yet to truly understand, to outright creating the trees. That said, I don't think it's really me that's creating these regular trees, and more of me somehow telling the system or the god that spawns creatures, monsters and vegetation to create something at a certain location. Or at least, that's how I suspect it works. That said, the limitation of these ability is that I can only boost existing trees, or for the creation of trees that I have already seen or are naturally native to this environment. So, now that there are these new varieties, I could potentially improve the biodiversity of the valley and the Freshlands with these new plants, if they don't prove to be over-competitive and won't crowd out the native. That said, Trevor and the artificial minds have assured me that they will actively monitor the population of all types of plants and would act accordingly. These new trees were not that suited for the Freshlands, and perhaps that was why they were not native. In some ways, they are more tropical than our temperate forests. So, we had to introduce them into areas where the weather was warmer and more humid. There were some such patches in the reclaimed Freshlands. I am quite willing to introduce new species to the Freshlands because it's essentially a blank slate that was once wiped clean by the demonic corruption. The existing species and types of trees that appear in the Freshlands are honestly rather uniform, and the temperate adapted trees only survived with some of my passives. Perhaps some time ago these plants were also present in these environments, but I don't know. In either case, the present level of diversity in the environment can be increased. There were also new types of insects and bugs that came from these faraway places. I wonder whether some of them would turn out to be pests. No. Correction. Pretty sure some of them will be pests, but for now I am willing to tolerate them. I recalled that there were all sorts of parasites, bugs and stuff that would sometimes cause infestations and massively hammer the productivity of plantations and fields. It's not a problem, between my own abilities, the druids, and the farmer's skills. Still, trade-related pests. Unwanted, but they happen. I thought about the issue of noble skills and whether that was something I wanted to meddle with. There was something about meddling with the lives, essentially stacking the deck, that makes me feel a little repulsed. I believed in meritocracy. At least, in some form I still do. But this honestly is unfair, isn't it? But the world never was fair. Everyone's dice is loaded in some way, differently. Master, a choice must be made. Consider that if we grant this right of marriage to the nobles, it will empower the nobility in the long run. Is it bad to further empower the nobility? Are they not already strong, relative to the regular folk? As it is, the common man with no special skills and levels would find it very hard to oppose a noble with better skills and higher levels. The inequality is already entrenched in the system. This whole hereditary issue is merely an outcome of that entrenched inequality. I decided that choice was important. My memories of all the pain and death was clear that, yes, power is important, but so is the ability to choose. I could assist and do some matchmaking, but anything will be voluntary. Parents and the child must both have the option to change their mind. Or was I being too lenient? In a world where monsters and people of a high level don't hesitate to flaunt their power, was this a foolish, naive thought process? It felt foolish. Master. Perhaps they should be only allowed a limited set of choices. Total freedom is unacceptable, not when they could choose to attack us. Patrick said. It is apt to consider these allies of ours in a symbiotic relationship. If that relationship were to turn hostile or one-sided, it is very much in our interest to eliminate them. Unless the master were to implement some kind of shackle. Jasmine suggested. Or there make their class powers conditional. Which thus leads to our next question, Master. Do you have the ability to retract the powers of the Eonic classes, should they ever turn hostile? Trevor's turn to ask a question. Master's abilities are very much that of a support class. An incredibly powerful support class with a niche offensive power. There are some powers I am clearly able to withdraw. Familiars, for one. But classes, I can't take them back once I've given them to the people. It only made sense, because a class is essentially a part of their soul spring. It didn't make sense that I could have them back so easily. Are familiars like Juris Bamboo, which is essentially a spiritual companion. I briefly attempted to withdraw the Eonic classes, but it seemed it doesn't work like that. Strangely, it was Lily's who provided insight into how my Eonic variant classes work. Essentially, I cannot take back the class, but each of these classes have a set of inbuilt rules that should they be broken, the class itself would be lost. It's like if a hero of justice suddenly committed an act of evil, they would lose their hero of justice class. But what are the rules of my Eonic classes? I couldn't answer that. But my Eonic priests seem to have a theory. Faith, belief, intent. In a way, classes behave quite like soul contracts. They give the individual power and abilities, and at the same time, impose conditions on them, and shape their thinking. I would have to accept that this is a risk I have to take with any super soldier, and can only have a second layer of oversight from Jasmine. In a way, it's quite like Lausanne. I invested in her, and now she's somewhere out there, living her life as an adventurer. I needed a talent management program, and succession planning. Indeed, I cannot guarantee every individual's loyalty, but I could, as a whole, improve my chances. In short, I should do what trees do. Go forth and multiply tilde. No. Spread my eggs into many baskets. Still sounds strange. I wonder why I still come back to this topic even though I've already set up the Valthorns and the Valtrian Order, and now an additional priesthood and triology school. Is it because I expanded the Freshlands too quickly, such that I do not have enough talent to manage a sprawling federation of somewhat loosely associated states? The envoys were not in a good position. The agreement meant that some of the princesses and princes were due to be marriage partners, but the envoys, until now, have not had any news. Their kings pressured them for updates. Are the planned engagements on? Who are the candidates? Our princes and princesses aren't getting any younger. Again, choice. These poor children don't have it. The norm for arranged marriage is when they turn 16 or 18 for humans, depending on the society, but for elves and other races, they have different ages of maturity. But generally, their women only get married later, when they are at least 30 to 40, since their children are considered extremely young, even though they are already 30 years old. It's tense. And insulting. Why isn't the wedding happening immediately? These kingdoms are wondering whether we were looking down on them. The task of managing the politics with these three neighboring kingdoms fell on Kavio, and he struggled. Even though he said what I meant to say, I decided to then summon the three envoys to meet me. All three meetings happened in a similar manner. They were brought to a location in the Valley of the Unrodden, before the Tree of Prayer. High Envoy. They all cower before me. Typical. Intentional. I heard that there's been a fuss about weddings and the candidates. I mentally spoke as authoritatively as I could. I could sense their legs shaking. Let your kings know that I have yet to decide on who deserves the hand of their children. People are weird. I had Kavio tell them the same thing, but they refuse to believe it. But when I tell them, they believe it. It's really about who says what, rather than what was said, in politics. So absolutely annoying. I mean, I am trying to delegate, but it's annoying when all these other people want the source or the truth. Damn it. Dash. News of the rifts being detected came in. Mostly in the eastern continent, apparently, but they've yet to see any actual demons. The rifts were spotted opening, and then, closing soon after. The temple's blockade and embargo is still in force, so it's really harder to get news, but we have our own informants. As long as message is still operational, we'd still have news. So far, they haven't seen any demons. Which is strange. Or the news just isn't getting in. Invisible demons. The Valtrian Order requested for more information. Dash. As the year went on, we had the first batch of accelerated graduates from my school. They were quickly sent to the front lines. There were a lot of social issues to be solved, and well, the graduates would have to pick things up as they go. Strangely, it reminded me of my time when I first started work. It's a difficult job, but they have the entire administrative machinery behind them. For many of the smaller villages, they mostly appreciated the help, and quickly warmed up to the presence of these new priests. But cities with existing temples, and nobles who are already believers of other religions, were a harder nut to crack. For smaller villages, where temples and priests visit sporadically, there always was a vacuum that could be filled. It's only because the priests of the other temples rarely devote themselves to smaller villages, and generally set up in the larger towns. So this was the strategy the Dakarchas adopted. The bulk of the population in the Freshlands and its neighboring kingdoms are in the rural areas anyway. This strategy, however, depended mainly on having a large number of priests. Even so, there are population centers unserved by the four temples. One of the clear weaknesses of this world is lack of objective data. Most nations have a vague number of their total population, but that's an estimate that's affected by the quality of data collection. Since I have the power of ever-present surveillance, it's a lot easier to then build a database. I could very accurately do a live count of how many people live in any particular city, how many refugees moved from place to place, their overall economic condition, and all such data points. Powers any economist would probably kill for. Instead, we are using it to maximize Eonic missionaries and entrench the Freshland's social, cultural, and religious influence in neighboring states. But I suppose that would be later, after I have stronger control. Earlier, I won the First Crusade because the Crusaders were a coalition army, but now I am essentially the head of a coalition, and I am trying to fuse the coalition together into some coherent, stable form. After thinking for a long time, I decided to award the marriage, in principle, to the senior clergy, exceptional Valtrian Order and Valthorns retiring from active service, and selected nobles, at a 30 hours 20 minutes and 50 seconds ratio. In short, the existing nobles would be rewarded for their loyalty with the marriage partners from these faraway kingdoms. As a coalition, I needed some carrots. At the same time, these marriages would be conditional, and require both partners to be converts of my faith. I would, accordingly, grant some blessings and gifts as their patron. The other half of the candidates would be granted for well-performing clergymen. The clergy are part of a social aspect, and they would require the official and unofficial status of the royals more than my Valthorns. Being married to royalty would allow them to tap into the unofficial networks that these royals have. For Valthorns, I decided it wasn't necessary to have them be part of this entire matchmaking process, but I acknowledged that some of the Valthorns would eventually retire from service, and intend to settle down. This would be a potential reward for their long service, at their choice. It was unlikely that I would use the quota I've set aside for the Valthorns, so I would use them for my priests instead. I summoned the senior representatives of the Freshlands, the Dakarchas and the Valtrian Order to announce my decision to the envoys. This meant, 8 of the princesses and princes will be wed to the priests, and another 7 princes and princesses to the nobles. Trevor and my fellow artificial minds had already compiled a list of nobles and priests that they saw performed acts that expanded the Freshlands, and after a quick review of their achievements, I went ahead with it. The nobles, if they themselves are unmarried, could take the award, or assign it to their children. A day after the award, the Dakarchas came to highlight some concerns. How would the princesses live with our priests? The gap in lifestyle would be too much and too large. They saw the marriage between the royalties and the priests as essentially setting them up for failure since they wouldn't get along, and the gap would mean these princesses would generally view their marriage as nothing more than a punishment. For these Eonic priests, would these marriages be a distraction from their real task of expanding the faith? Some nobles too had concerns and worries. One of the noble I awarded the right to marry was rather poor, simply because his land was still developing and it would take a while for him to amass any kind of wealth. Building wealth is a noble is a long process, unless one has exceptional skills and abilities. The right to marry a princess was stressful. It did not feel good how quickly the complaints and concerns emerged. I had the impression they wanted this. I summoned the Dakarchas and priests again, and most of the Dakarchas, being the first generation of high priests, proposed that the weddings as sweeteners for our allied kingdoms. There were some kingdoms that had shifted allegiances to the Freshlands, before I captured the 6 ports. A reward for changing allegiances early. I thought about it long and hard, and spoke to the priests whom I awarded the rights to. They were all overwhelmed by the idea of marrying a princess. These were hard-working, driven people who spent most of their time in villages giving out aid and converting more and more people to my faith. It's stressful. I had made a mistake. I should backtrack. So, I rescinded the awards. And gave them to those kingdoms that changed sides. These marriages enhanced the links between the kingdoms. I just hoped they didn't eventually transform into a net that trapped me instead. The temples expanded the blockage to cover the entirety of the continent. They are essentially forcing the kingdoms on the central continent to choose. The temples are essentially saying, attack the Freshlands, or this blockade will last forever. Some of the kingdoms and nations from across the central continent are amassing their army, and yet they are fearful of attacking. The demons have appeared, and until they have certainty over where the demon king will spawn. It's really the fear of the unknown. The leaders of this generation lived 40 years under the implied protection of Harrison Gang. For 4 successive demon kings, the kingdoms and nations could live without much worry because the heroes are already here. For some of the kings and rulers, they never lived through this period where there's no hero. Fear and panic abound, and so, the kinds of messages Kavio and the diplomatic corps receive are also mixed. Hilarious, isn't it? Yvonne said at a meeting of the Valtrian Order, comprising the senior Valthorns and various other individuals. Every month, there's a summary of all diplomatic communications circulated to the Valtrian Order, the Valthorns, the senior Eonic priests, and also the Council of Representatives. Why are these kings asking such things? It's fear. Jura said. He remembered the days of New Frika. It's a strange feeling to feel powerless before a demon king. It's like hiding in a house when a storm hits, and this time, the storm hits when one's outside. For the other group of rulers, they've got utmost confidence in their own abilities, and that they didn't need heroes. Of course, their own priests and wizards had attempted to counsel them otherwise, but these rulers are probably the spoiled brats who now have power. Or maybe they are just idiots. These groups are taunting me, and they've sent nastily worded missives. They've also talked about raising an army, but didn't actually deploy their army anywhere out of their borders. Probably posturing. This is the mad rush before the demon winter, the time for the grasshopper to build a stockpile before the snow falls. The time for preparation. By now the living societies must have adapted to the presence of these almost regular 10-year cycles. They only deviate by a small amount, and yet society is no better prepared for it. I wonder whether they feel like it's an economic recession that always inevitably arrives. Patrick's insight into the minds of the regular folk suggests that they don't even think about it. Most of the citizens plan at most a month ahead. Nobles and merchants would plan a year ahead. But the idea of 10-year plans would seem really silly for these mortals who feel that so much can change in a few years, that 10-year plans are moot from the day they are made. Chapter 105 Treatiary Studies. Year 134. Mini dragons. More accurately, demon drakes. The demons had opted for a strategy I speculated a few decades ago that I thought would be effective against heroes. No fodder units, just high-tier demons. They made it into drakes. Fire-breathing and lightning-breathing drakes. At first, news was hard to come by. The central continent was on lockdown after all. But the drakes spawned and spread quickly, and somehow they multiplied rather quickly too. Just 10 drakes could lay waste to an entire town, and the defenses would be hard-pressed to even counter them. The drakes would fly up in the air and just use their breath attacks until the defenders were dead. It reminded me of Alexis. Alexis easily torched the forest too when she was possessed by the demon's will. Decades later, I am still likely to be rather defenseless against a similar tactic. I mean, I have spiders who could fire ensnaring webbings, but I am highly skeptical of their effectiveness against mini-champion class drakes. As a result, I've been using my class fusion ability to train specialist anti-air sharpshooters and bowmasters. These are regular rangers and archers, upgraded a little more. But still, I think they would be insufficient if there are champion class demon drakes. I suspect they would be more like dragons. The blockade has faltered in parts, because there was chaos in the eastern continent. We receive news of the citizens fleeing underground, as these flying demons were mostly unchallenged. What good are walls, when these demons just fly over them? In fact, what good are my walls? My walls wouldn't do shit either. Jura, we need to restart our underground bunker project. In the days of New Freaka we built a massive sewer that's also an underground bunker. But it proved ineffective when the ground itself liquefied into demonic goop. Will it work this time? Against flying demons, what else? This is essentially air superiority. The demons have it, and unless I can field dragons or Garudas and whatnot, the best defense is some kind of anti-air defensive array. Magical cannons to counter them. We started work on massive anti-demon ballistas, and a special beetle-spider collaboration, a beetle cannon that would fire spiders at the demons. These spiders would hold onto large vines and they would ensnare these flying demons. It would pull them to the ground where the rest of my forces and my root strikes can easily disable them. Ballistas, nets, and shields. Harpoons and arrows too. This was the time for my upgraded classes to contribute. The upgraded master woodworkers and weapon makers assisted to make stronger anti-demon weapons. Their skill allowed them to make these ballista bolts lighter, go a bit further, and deal more damage. They can even weave a few extra enchantments than usual. More weapons, with a focus on anti-air. There's also a side effort on improving my mages, but the thing was, mages are hard to scale and reproduce in large numbers. Mages are ultimately dependent on their personal talent and I can't give them much anti-demonic effects, unlike these ballistas and arrows, where I can easily improve their damage output against these demons by using special wooden materials made from my body. The demons remained mostly on the eastern continent. News was sporadic, and it seemed like these demons didn't attack everywhere. But they hit really hard, with large groups of flying demon drakes. So, the War of the Aviltri entered a quiet phase. Other than the blockade, no one actually did any large-scale fighting. A time to hunker down, and prepare for the eventual demonic conflict. Every general worth their salt would make plans. How to deal with these demon drakes. Archers. Ballistas. Huge army of mages. Every king would be watching the skies, for when these demons would cross the oceans and assail their lands. In an odd twist of events, the blockade essentially became a ring of watchers that helped the central continent act as a chain of lookout points for these flying demons. What's the last record of flying demons? According to surviving records, 500 or so years ago. One of Kavio's assistants answered. It was reported then that they were horned demons with massive wings that threw fireballs. Do we have records of the heroes? Not much, other than their names and the kingdoms they've founded. It's annoying that the history of the world's in such a great mess. No one actually knows what happened. Even Lily's has only a slice of the world, and only. From their perspective, the idea of an objective history rarely exists because of how frequently the demons reset every attempt to collect information in a single place. So, I decided, maybe I should throw my hat into this game as well. Have there been great libraries in the past? It seemed like a thing for trees to be collectors of the world's knowledge. It's almost tropey that heroes would inevitably consult an ancient tree for some historical context. So well, I should play my part in the trope. But you can't read. Correct. And that is a problem. I had people read to me in the past, like when I was studying the runes. I already had a program to collect books, but that was in the days of New Freaka. Many of the collected books were destroyed when the corruption and flames torched the valley, but some were still safe, stored inside my secret hideout. If I could create a library, and make it into a skill like what I did with Mila's Hotel, I could fuse an artificial mind into the new library skill, and create a living tree librarian. And I attempted this on a few subsidiary trees. I made shelves after shelves and stocked them up with books. In this world, books are expensive. They are handwritten or magically written, so the cost of producing books has not gone down at all. They are also made of paper. But at the same time, this was not true everywhere. There are cities where books are common, because some of the mages have set up bookmaking enterprises, but in a world where global trade is still in its infancy, this sort of practice has not spread. But I didn't get it. Even after 2 months, there was no special library tree that I could make. I could use my special Demon Slayer class now. I mean, I could assign it to one of my master archers, or Jura. I am not a good matchup against flying demons. Jura shrugged. I'd think Lausanne would be a better fit, but she's not here. Or Lovies, Spearmaster. Or the new, sharpshooters, or marksman. He wasn't keen on fighting more demons. Oh, And Lausanne sent a note. She encountered some of these demons, and there's a birther demon that spawns more demons. These birthers are wingless. Oh, that's a good thing. That meant that these demons can't fly across the ocean and then start a new nest. Unless a rift appeared here, and these wingless demons appeared through it. But that is an assumption that these wingless demons stay wingless, or there's no transformation process for large demon drakes to become these wingless demons. In short, well, we still don't know whether we're really safe. Consolidation. Jasmine and my team of artificial minds focused on ensuring that the new territories are integrated into the land. It's a case of fighting fire, really. We could sense areas where there's growing discontent, and we would deploy Ionic priests and the Valthorns to help calm the place down, and reduce the possibility of an unrest. It's a very Civ-like problem, dealing with growing unrest across the territories, and therefore demanded a social response. It's relatively effective as my artificial mind's observational abilities give me insight into the problem. I would then inform the priests of the problem, and they would then solve it. In a sense, I help to cut out the discovery aspect of their social work. In any social unhappiness, it's very tempting to solve the symptoms, instead of the root cause. In fact, this is normally the cause back home, because the governments have no ability to read minds, and also, they are unable to communicate with themselves. Various departments are each like blind men touching an elephant, unable to form a complete coherent picture as they do not communicate. The artificial minds are overpowered in this sense. Their ability to operate as a unified AI essentially meant they could seamlessly gather multiple data points on a single person and stitch them together, bypassing all the departmental silos common in government institutions and corporate structures. Using my artificial mind's observational skills, it was also a lot easier to find out who wasn't playing their part in society. Like a noble who's hoarding too much gold. Or somebody's collecting more taxes than what the law mandated. Still, unhappiness is something that not only needs to be managed, the people must also be directed into productive activities that feel satisfying. That usually involved getting to do work, and finding enjoyment in that work. A difficult task, but priests of this world are well equipped with skills that help them to do just that. My artificial minds also spied extensively on the nobles and the ruling class, and I would then use that information to also help the priests in navigating the nobility. It's a tense relationship between the nobles and these priests. To them, they view our priests as invaders, and my priests, though they have training, still need help. They have to be sensitive, and be seen as working with the nobles, not against them. The intention is to convert these nobles to my faith, and have them work with us. That, to some extent, involved mild re-education of the nobles. So, it was one of the Descartes who gave an extremely brilliant idea. Eon, as it is, we have a school for priests. Yes, I believe it is also appropriate to have a school for the nobles' children and the royal children. I paused and considered the idea. Indeed, if I do want to culturally indoctrinate the entire continent, I should go beyond that. I need schools in every single country on this continent such that they all get history and views from the Freshlands perspective. I would need it to work hand in hand with the Ionic priests too, such that they also get exposed to my faith. But a first step would be to gather all the noble children and give them an education with a Freshlands bias. That way, these nobles would take these ideas and principles that we inculcate and they would later act as our ambassadors. One day when they take over their respective regions they would naturally seek to be closer to the Freshlands. It's a first step for a continent-wide compulsory education system. Right now most children do some kind of labor, apprenticeship. The wealthier ones employ tutors to train them in particular fields. I could capitalize on the present Valthorn's reputation as a group of strong warriors to entice the nobles. I would make warriors out of their children. I would make leaders out of them too. I could even dangle special classes or upgraded classes as rewards for the best performing noble children, thereby granting these nobles a chance to get ahead in life. A Noble Children Academy. If I do this, I will be the founder of an Isekai Academy Center. What if the heroes end up isekaiing into my Noble Academy? Or some otherworlder reincarnated as a lowly noble? No matter. If I want cultural strength, a Noble Academy would work very well in the current framework. I could set up the Noble Academy, the Priest Academy, and the Valthorn Military Academy as competing institutions, and essentially acting as each other's check and balances. It would work, and I get to avoid the whole marriage debacle too. It was a great idea, and if I set it up within Patrick's mind reading range, I'd be able to get greater insight into the thoughts and personalities of these young nobles. Even if I hate the whole idea of a noble class, this would allow me to collect data on the nobles' powers across a vast sample of young nobles. I could then compare this data against the Valthorns and have a good understanding of how nobles compare against regular children. I would then use this to shape my education for the common folk, and eventually set up a school for commoners. I would then lift that class up, and build another group of elite from that group. I agree, Patriarch, I said a few days later. The idea of a school for nobles and royals is a one with great potential. Indeed, it was even natural that the idea came from the clergy. The idea of the modern university or college had roots in various missionary schools and cathedral schools. I summoned Jura, Cavio, and the entire Council of Representatives. The representatives are pretty much entirely nobles from the various segments of the Freshlands, and so, the pioneer batch of students will most likely be their offsprings. I explained the idea to them. It wasn't entirely a foreign concept. Some royal families have such similar academies, but they were all small. The various other temples operated a distributed education system where the education is conducted by the clergy. There was a mixed reaction at first. Then I dangled the reward for the children. I would grant the top 10 students a select choice of upgraded classes, skills, and equipment. Then each of these nobles saw the potential. It would be a 4-year program from the nobles, and quickly some of the nobles volunteered the children. It would be between ages 16 to 25 for humans, for elves, during their teen years, any time between 18 to 40, for the treefolk and so on, during their formative pre-adulthood years. Jura and Yvonne, both of you will continue to lead the Valtrian and Valthorn academies. Their priorities should remain with the Valthorns. They are my de facto military arm, and I see the Valthorns essentially as the military academy. I would have to hire new people to lead this entire practice, and so, I set out to gather generals, retired administrators, merchants, and people who are old and have a reasonably high level. I also started checking around the surroundings of Freshka for a location. It would be a massive mini-city of its own, in the same breath as the School of Trilogy. In my mind, I would call it the Ivy League College, but that sounded too much like copyright infringement, so one decided I was going to call it the University. But then, the University would be a better fit for the University of the Commoners. I even have a slogan already. Unitary is strength. Eventually I settled on a name for the school for these nobility, the Freshlands Treatiary College of Governance, or the FTC. I wanted to avoid any specific mention of nobles in the name, such that I could eventually convert it into a regular college that can also accept non-nobles, so I had to plan this out. Also, there was no immediately suitable place for this college, so I decided to call our Master Builders and Grand Druids to terraform and shape a land into a place suitable to build the FTC. It would take a full 6 months for a place to be built, even with the resources, but at the same time, I also quickly auctioned up smaller subdivided plots of land in the FTC zone to all our allied kingdoms, that they can build a mini palace for their offsprings in the future. From what I understood of the nobles, they have a strong need to maintain face, and so, allowing the nobles and royalties to invest in a plot of land to show off to other young children would be popular. For the first batch, I had to start off with a bang. So, I looked at my skill and class seeds, and experimented on the Lord classes from the dead nobles, and eventually, I made 2 classes, from a mashup of Rangers and Traders with the Lord classes. Ranger Lord and Trade Lord. In addition to Marksman, General, and various other classes. We announced it to our allies that the best 2 students will be given these class seeds, which they may consume for themselves or gift to anyone they please. Then, real interest started to come in. Kings from across our allied nations all volunteered to send a small group of their children to vie for the spot. Of course, now that we have students, we then had to build a syllabus. We already have one from the Valthorns, but the Valthorns are essentially a martial school. They are exceptionally combat focused. This program would have to be a little bit balanced, across combat, magic, trade and governance, culture and history, and equally important, an education in the Eonic faith. The goal was cultural dominance on the continent, secure the Freshlands' place in the world, and establishing myself as a legitimate faith and religion, with my own followers to push back against these 4 enemy faiths. So the combat focus would have to be watered down, and the other aspects expanded. I had to gather a few Dakarchas, some of the Freshlands' best traders and makers, to give their input, together with those level 30 to 40 tutors. I would also have to train the tutors such that they become respectable in their own right, else this school wasn't going to work. Level 30 to 40 is average. Freshka would transform into the home of 3 large competing schools. The Valthorn Academy located in Freshka itself, and the associated military fields and locations. The School of Trilogy in another outskirt area of Freshka, as a school for my clergy. Then lastly, the Treaty College is the school for future nobility. Secretly, I also earmarked a large spot for the future fourth school. The university of the masses. As it is, I can only gather sufficient talent for one school, and I didn't need to increase the tension from managing noble commoner dynamics. It's a plan that would take centuries to play out, but if I do this right, this generation of young leaders would eventually propagate my faith. This was an investment that would only pay off at least 20 to 30 years into the future. I am impressed, but at the same time, it's hypocritical. Yvonne said one evening. Eon once said he hated the royalty, and here he is, amplifying their power. Jura nodded. I agree. It's pragmatic though. But I am sure he is aware of the hypocrisy. Lately, Eon is rather calculative. It's those trees. I mean, you've seen them, right? The weird flashing ones. Nope. Jura shrugged as he watched a bunch of archers practice another volley. The Valthorn's focus has been anti-air. Archers, rangers, working with our master woodworker to make anti-demonic wooden arrows, further enchanted with magic. In a mildly interesting development, the senior Eonic priests and patriarchs gained a skill that allows them to bless weapons and people with Eonic-style anti-demonic effects on top of their regular holy element enchantments. So, the Triology school is also assisting to produce enchanted weapons. I wonder how the holy element can coexist when I am the patron deity and I have only one holy enchantment magic that I inherited from long ago. I've also observed that the priest's powers are mostly independent from mine, even if derived from me. In the sense that the priests can use as much power as they have, and I would not be affected. It's not as if their use of Eonic abilities are a drain on me. Quite unlike Lausanne's Warden, which has a defined monthly star mana maintenance cost. How does that work? Is it like the system created a specific pool of energy from which all these Eonic priests then call on for power? Or are all powers derived from the system, and I am just the lawmaker, but not the source of the power? This is certainly a rather weird system. Side story: Lausanne and the demons. End of year 133, beginning of year 134. City of Perhimpunen, of the Sultanate of Timertenga, Eastern Continent. Lausanne stared at the Ivan Templar. It's been a few years, 6 years since they released her from their home imprisonment, but somehow, the sight of Templars still triggered her, a little bit. Even if her stay was pleasant, a prison is still a prison. Greetings, Lady Lausanne. The Templar of Ava handed her a magical letter. A message from Grandmaster Enka. She frowned, but this wasn't the first time she received a letter from Enka. Enka had convinced her, as part of her release terms many years ago, that she would assist with demon-related matters. No matter, the letter magically unlocked itself the moment she touched it. Investigate the village of Dimuzna. Demon sightings suspected. Local temple did not respond back. More info at city temple. She frowned. At first, this didn't seem like something that needed her assistance. But then she pondered it and a gut feeling told her it wasn't so simple. Her husband and the rest of the playing swords were there too. A few members changed. 2 died. Her husband frowned. Enka has some task for you again. Yeah, but investigate this village of Dimuzna. Any idea where that is? Lausanne repeated the contents in private to the rest of her adventurer team. One of the team members unfurled a map and they soon found it. It was a few days from the city. It was a small village that bordered the central canyons. Lausanne nodded. All right, thanks. I'll be going. She walked with her husband to somewhere quiet, and gave him a hug. I'll have to go do this. Artie just smiled. Take care, all right. It's very close to the start of demon season. Don't bite more than you can chew. He said that every time Lausanne went out on her own, but he knew Lausanne wasn't reckless. Clueless occasionally, but not reckless. Well, be taking on missions around here. It wasn't right for her to ask her team to go with her for her personal bargain with the temple. As Lausanne walked up the steps into the Ivan temple, 2 Templars stopped her. State your business. Lausanne nodded and flashed a special Ivan ring. They nodded and let her in. It was her first time in this city's temple, but they all had a similar layout. The High Templar was at the top. The High Templar was already waiting. The High Templar was the lead military officer of the temple in this city. Every large Ivan temple had one. Greetings, Lausanne. There were 2 other Templars in the room. We believe demons from the rift have been spotted near Dimuzna, and Enka believes you're the best person to investigate. We would have sent Templars, but we're shorthanded at the moment. Lausanne shrugged. All the High Templars always sounded like they were a bit irritated at her. They, of course, didn't know her Eonic origins, or else they'd all attempt to kill her. Instead, Enka had constructed an elaborate plan to drown out news about her origins, so they only know that she's an elf from the highland cities of the north. It was easy to fake her origins when she left the central continent so many years ago. Well, arrange a carriage to get you to a nearby town. And here's a document for you. The High Templar said, and that was the end of the conversation. The document was magically sealed, but it was more elaborate. There was a small guest meeting room where she sat, and opened it. It seemed that Dimuzna was already destroyed, but they didn't know what, so essentially, they needed someone who had a scout or ranger's abilities to track the demons. There were no known markings or footprints. Lausanne made the journey that night, and in 2 days she reached the nearest town. From there, she would have to walk. The mood in the town was strange, and she noticed how sparsely populated it was. She was the only one in the inn that day. Have they disappeared? No. Most of them have fled the town. The innkeeper said. The sudden destruction of Dimuzna was scary. It wasn't a secret. And no one dared venture near. Lausanne just glanced at the map again. This was a sparsely populated part of the continent anyway. If demons wanted to hide away and bide their time, this was the perfect place. But that implied they could think, and Lausanne was relatively sure not all demons can think. Could this generation think? At least to a limited degree. The very few hints she got seemed to imply it. She continued her journey the next day. The area is dry, almost desert-like. There was some vegetation, but most of them were small. There were cactuses too. Still, a village existed here simply because of the mines and the minerals that wash up on the shores of the canyon's rivers. It would take her a day and some to finally arrive, at her speed. It was early morning when she arrived at the village and saw the destroyed village. There was visible charring on the floor, as if some intense flame burned through the entire area. She touched the charred dirt, sniffed it a little. Demons. Unmistakably so. But there were no footsteps of creatures or demons. Well, there were fleeing villages, but the ground burned wherever they fled. She looked at the shape and angle of the charring. Whatever it was, it attacked from a higher altitude. Possible the height of a walker. Could be some kind of ranged attacker, or flying. Lausanne said to herself, as she examined the ruins. She looked at the direction of the flame, and went the other way. If it's a tall demon like a walker, there should be some footsteps or imprints on the ground. Nothing. There were more flames and charring, but no footsteps. Most likely a flyer. She paused. She briefly remembered one of her many dream spars, where she fought flying creatures. This seemed to match it. Had the rift opened? It was about time. A generation of flying demons would be frightening. She mentally informed Warden to prepare some extra throwing spears, and adjusted the 3 wooden spears on her back. If they really are flyers, she'll need them soon enough. The trail of flames eventually ended at the edges of a canyon. Where did they go? Lausanne looked at the river, and at the edges of the canyons as far as she could see. It was dry. There were no monsters either. Upriver then. That's the typical answer. She began walking along the canyon. If they were hiding, they must have found a cave or something. She looked at a map, and there are parts where the river's hidden underground. Or perhaps on the other side of the tributaries. Vines extended from both her hands, and she used them like long feelers. At her level, she could stretch it from one side to the other side, and she'd be able to use her vines and swing along the river, using the canyon walls as her anchors. That would be a faster way to travel along the canyons. She steeled herself, and began moving. There was nothing. The canyons were vast, and as she moved upriver, she noticed little shiny things in the river. Gems. The reason why the village of Dimuzna even existed. Now's not the time for that. She said to herself. Maybe on the trip back, once she located the demons. It took about an hour, then she thought she heard something. A soft growl, almost imperceptible. She reeled in her vine and it pulled her to the canyon walls. A few vines popped out of her body and allowed her to latch onto the wall like a spider. Then she saw it, a hole in the wall right at the river water's edge. This was almost 3 hours away from the village. There were easily 5 of them. 3 of them were massive. Large, winged, and they were in different colors. Black, dark brown, reddish black, horned. But they also had glowing red eyes. Dragons. Lausanne paused, and she stared a little longer. No. Demons that resembled dragons. But why were they hiding? It was then she saw smaller dragons. The smaller dragons stepped out of the hole and dived into the river. A while later it emerged. What was it doing? Using her vine legs, she crawled closer, then she saw it half hidden inside the hole. A larger, wingless dragon. The smaller dragon walked next to it, and it spat out some gems. This larger demon dragon ate it, and it glowed. Then it laid an egg. Lozon felt chills. This was a breeding demon, like Sabnok. Sabnok latched on magical locations to grow massive armies. She looked at them, and sensed their magical power. They were not weak. Not as strong as a walker or a champion, but certainly more of the demon elite or demon general tier. It made sense why the village was destroyed so easily. These demons, they are only a few of them, but they needed someone at least level 50 or 60 to fight them. The demons did not spot her. She used a bit of her druidic powers to move the rock around her, like a natural camouflage. She waited, and watched them a little more. They were eating the gems in the river, and they would also feed the gems to the wingless demon in the cave. What made them suddenly attack the village? Were they spotted? Were they instructed by the demon king to hide and multiply until the time is right? She waited till night. The demons still didn't spot her, and she noticed they were constantly eating. Then, two of the large demon dragons flew away. Only the wingless, one larger demon dragon and two smaller ones were left. If she wanted a chance, this was it. She waited for the two large demon dragons to fly further away. She took a deep breath, and reached for two wooden anti-demon spears. She leapt out of her hideout, and quickly activated her anti-demon suppression aura. The demons turned, and her wooden spear glowed in a bright green light. Spear of destruction, she landed right on one of the smaller demons. It was unprepared, and the spear went through the head. It collapsed there and then. The wingless demon roared, and it breathed a jet of fire. The other larger one quickly took flight and opened its mouth. She threw her other spear at it, accelerated by her power. Flying spear. The demon's fire breath clashed with the flying anti-demon spear. But she had no time. She quickly leapt away to avoid the wingless demon's fire blast. She cursed. She should have attacked the wingless demon first. She thought she could take that one later. The wingless demon's fire breath continued to streak across the canyon walls, as it attempted to chase her down. She called on Warden to produce more throwing spears, and she flung it at the wingless demon. It wasn't moving, only its head was. But the other, larger flying demon was already flying into another position. She turned and quickly used her vines to change directions. There was another jet of fire. She landed on another side of the canyon walls. The demon was still flying, and it breathed fire into the canyon. It intended to coat the entire canyon with fire. She grunted and the flames started to coat her surroundings. The wingless dragon was still there. She couldn't get it. She made a mistake. The demon dragon kept breathing fire. If she wanted to fight it, she needed to get it down, lower to the ground. Or, she had to fly up there. That area of the canyon would be entirely blanketed with fire soon. She needed to do it now. She used her vines and attached itself to the canyon walls, and with some magic, transformed herself into an arrow and shot herself into the sky at the demon. Then, with another spear, and a vine attached to it, flung it into its body. This time, the demon aimed its jet of flame at Lozon instead of the spear, so the spear managed to pierce the flying demon. Steel wood barrier. The jet of flame burned the wooden barrier, but she was fine. She landed on the ground, and then activated constrict. The vine exploded into a massive tangle of vines around the demon, and she planted her feet on the ground. Entrench. The vines linked up with the roots Lozon created in the ground, and with the roots supporting her, she pulled the constricted demon out of the sky. It crashed into the ground with a loud bang, but it wasn't over. It breathed fire again. Steel wood barrier. A barrier blocked the flames, opening a space for Lozon to quickly move ahead. She had to do it now when it was on the ground. Super anti-demon root strike. 3 massive roots emerged from the ground and it skewered the large demon dragon. It then disintegrated, and left behind gems and some other things. A roar, followed by another. The 2 large demon dragons were coming back. She had to get the wingless dragon first. She suspected the wingless dragon to be something like a birther, so she needed to get rid of it, else the demons would continue to multiply. She used her vines and her abilities to speed up. She needed to get back to where the wingless dragon was. But it was gone. Only the smaller one was there, and it roared. Lozon decided a demon was still a demon, even if it's small. With a vine attached to a spear, she flung it at the smaller demon. It died instantly from the attack, even though it did try to fight it off. She heard the roars again. If the 2 large demons are back, it'll be another hard fight. The mature demon dragons were just below a demon walker in offensive ability, but thankfully their defenses were rather weak. But where's the wingless one? If it's wingless, there should be footsteps. She looked around and activated a common druidic ability, which was to borrow animal-like abilities. Scent of the prey, and she followed it. It went even further upstream and it didn't manage to go very far. It was large, but not very fast. Lozan used her vines to slingshot herself at the wingless demon. It's a grounded demon, so she should be able to use super anti-demon root strike once she gets in range. The demon's head turned and it spat a huge amount of fire. It charred the wooden barrier around her, but not good enough. She was almost there. It had a massive tail and it moved to strike. It smashed into the charred barrier, but the barrier was still intact. There was another tail that came at her from the right. Did it always have two tails? The tails smashed right into the wooden shield and knocked her into the canyon wall. She didn't see that coming, and mentally thanked Warden for a protective shield that helped absorb the impact. Still, the shockwave hurt. At least it wasn't a Walker-class enemy, and at this distance, she could counterattack. 5 anti-demon roots emerged from the floor and pierced the wingless demon dragon, and it roared. Almost like it was in pain, but it turned and breathed fire. She sensed its energy dissipating, and yet it kept breathing fire into the narrow canyon. Lozan leapt and then used 2 vines to latch on to the top of the canyon walls, and launched herself up. The wingless demon wasn't moving. The 5 roots were still firmly planted in its body. She retrieved another wooden spear from Warden and flung it at the wingless demon. This time, it smashed into its body and then the body cracked. Then the cracks lit up. And the wingless demon exploded. It left gems and other things splattered all over the canyon floor. Yet, it's not over. Not yet. There's 2 more larger demons that should be on the way. She heard their roar, and again. They were fleeing. She didn't expect that. Or did something else call them? Lozan found a place to stop and just do a short self-check. Parts of her skin were bleeding, and some parts burned. She'll need a day or 2 to heal them. One of her prized wooden spears broke too. Still, now she had time to think. Strategically, they would need a whole lot of archers and mages. Way more. Anti-demon arrows would need to be the default equipment. She was in no condition to chase after the 2 large demon drakes. The battle used up quite a bit of her energy, so she decided to head back instead. A Templar was already waiting for her at the nearest village. Lady Lozan, you've located the enemy. Yes. Identified as winged demons that can breath fire and perhaps other elemental attacks. She gave a long list of observations of what she's seen, things like size, attack patterns, types of attacks and so on. The Templar nodded and quickly started to compile it into a document that will go straight to the Grand Master. Once completed, the Templar left, and Lozan rested in the village. She wondered whether the 2 large demon drakes would return, but she's too tired to care. Summon spirit bird. Lozan looked at a small ethereal bird. Keep watch, little one. The bird nodded and flew off. Chapter 106 Practical Experience. Year 135. The Demon King was late. It didn't come this year, and so we hear more of the Eastern Continent's struggle with the demon drakes. More fighting, but so far, the Eastern Continent has managed to hold the demons back, and keep them on their continent. It was rather admirable, really. Stories of great sacrifice to hold back the flying demons. Of champions and adventurers. Of archmages and all, banding together to slay dragons. It was the kind of tale passed down the family, or made into song. Or great bravery from everywhere. Where were all of these warriors before the Demon King? Did they have a mind block, that they only displayed initiative, courage before lesser demons? Of course, many kingdoms naturally offered to send some nominal aid to the Eastern Continent, but due to the blockade, all aid from the Central Continent was blocked. There's strange rumors coming out of the other continents, that the Central Continent as a whole is now referred to as a cursed continent. It's essentially a psyops attack meant to target all these merchants and regular people to reduce demand for travel between their continent and the Central Continent. Have the 4 temples decided that it's better to just cut out the entire Central Continent from their collective conscience? What's the meaning of this? Jura and Kavio asked the secret envoy of Ava. Is this your fake war? It's the best possible outcome to avoid bloodshed. Even if we revealed this ruse, I reckon no one would believe us. Ava's conduct has been consistently warlike. Every single continent outside of the Central Continent has been amending their maps to mark the entire Central Continent as cursed and that a travel ban was instituted. Kavio was exceptionally mad. You're essentially telling all the other kingdoms on this continent that all of them are a lost cause. The envoy nodded. It is a necessary sacrifice. A curtain falls on the Central Continent. A cold war is better than an actual war. Well, Since the four temples have essentially gifted these other nations to me, it would be horrible of me to refuse their hospitality. It's free real estate, after all. As a result, I quickly commanded Kavio to send envoys to all these nations, to discuss cooperation and trade. They must feel betrayed that they have been essentially locked out of the global trade routes. They could have secret arrangements. Some of these kingdoms must have been warned beforehand. Kavio suggested. They may rebuff us. I foresee some of them will attempt to negotiate exemptions for themselves, if not publicly, then secretly. Then investigate. Either way, since they are doing this rebranding, we can certainly retaliate in the same manner. I wondered whether I should, though. What are the implications? Get some people together and consider the implications of it. They would need some time to do the necessary investigative research, and I created a few more additional artificial minds to assist Jasmine with the monitoring of the new territories. A cultural shift. Traditionally, each continent wasn't significantly different from the others. The central continent itself usually had a mix of all four temples and the other lesser temples, and the nobility generally communicated with each other via message teleport and other long-range travel or communication skills. It was the rudimentary framework of a globally connected elite. But now that entirety, amplified by Sabnok, and now this blockade, it essentially meant the culture of the central continent's elites will no longer be in sync with the rest of the world, and that will cascade down, since the citizens have a tendency to parrot the cultural practices of the nobility. Already, the nobility are second-guessing themselves. Throughout the central continent, the blockade caused economic problems for the merchant class, and that greatly impacted the wealth of the nobility, even if it didn't really affect the regular citizens. The new trade routes have brought prosperity to my three new trading partners. The towns along the trade route grew quite well. The truck beetles were actually quite popular, mainly to haul heavy, bulky goods that are relatively cheap. For some inland countries, they have a relatively monotonous choice in terms of their food, so the Freshlands traders capitalized on the reliability and relative consistency of the truck beetles and introduced new varieties of food, fruits and herbs. The merchants were also doing some demand-side work. They collaborated with cooks and chefs to introduce new dishes and foods made with a fusion of native food and freshland foods. It's fascinating what these merchants do to make people buy their products. There are purists, of course, that resist these foreign foods, but among the nobility eager to sample new things, and among the poor who cannot choose, new types of food are very welcome. Next were weapons. My woodworkers are still working on more anti-air weapons, making enchanted arrows and so on. Most of these were for the Valthorns and the Freshlands army, but a small batch of anti-demon anti-air weapons and ammo were distributed for sale. After all, now that the rest of the world has effectively cut off the rest of the kingdoms, there was a vacuum that I naturally had to fill. I wanted to be seen as sharing my benefits with the allied kingdoms, that I am arming them for their own protection. This was essentially weapons diplomacy. The temples would usually place some lesser hero items in allied kingdoms, or those that have earned their favor as a reward. It was this reward in exchange for hero items that helped build the temple's influence. That said, the excommunicated hero Astra did mess with that power balance by selling hero items in large quantities in exchange for territory and resources. Some countries benefited from the Four Temples blockade. Those that have a developed craftsman class suddenly benefited from having a captive market. Still, trade tensions were rising, and despite the specter of the demons looming over us, a few of the desperate kingdoms finally launched small attacks. Specialized hit squads made of their strongest adventurers. We saw them coming. The moment they entered Patrick's psychic range, their plans were all revealed. We even prepared a nice welcoming party for them. Patrick had used his ability to reveal their plans, and so we knew what we were getting into. The moment the adventurer group, a group of level 60s and 70s, about 10 of them approached the valley, I had the Valthorns already ready to engage, and the necessary traps. In fact, Patrick alone could have disabled them, with a surge of overwhelming psychic attack. But that wouldn't allow the Valthorns to level, so we let them fight it out, and right when they were supposed to reveal their explosive artifact, I had a few vines emerge, and grabbed it. Then I sent it into my magic lab for further investigation. After that we had our usual interrogation session, and then, death. I kept a few mementos of these adventurers, and had a messenger deliver these remains back to the kingdom that sent them. That kingdom wanted these adventurers to be unidentified and unlinked to them, but clearly they didn't know I could read minds. Maybe they should have mindwiped them, if they had such power. I didn't want to make it public. After all, it's better to respond with nuance. I suspect the king's desperate, that's why he resolved to such acts. A final act, a desperate one. And now it didn't work. the king's plan will crumble and they know it. This would force them to bend. Now, I wait. In the meantime, the construction of the 3 schools are complete, and the trainers are actively developing the syllabus. The first generation of students, the pioneer batch of noble children, have arrived to begin their new study life in the TreeTree College. I soon found the quality of the trainers extremely lacking. They were low-leveled, in the range of level 30s and 40s in the field they were selected to teach. Still, they were chosen because they were willing to do this sort of work. At this point, Yvonne had a very good comment. She did have experience as a training tree, and she is the principal of the Valthorns Academy. It ultimately depends on what you desire in them, Eon. A good teacher must have the right teaching skills. He need not be a master of his craft, he merely needs to be a good guide along the student's path. Technical competence and ability to teach are 2 different matters. In your experience, what matters more? Will these students be granted use of your learning dreams? Currently, the effects of training tree and various other learning support skills is what ultimately pushed the Valthorns to a high level. If it was just me and Jura, the Valthorns would never reach such a high level. I spoke to Ferris and Edna, my 2 highest leveled new generation warriors, on what they felt were more important. Both didn't seem particularly fond of nobles and nobility, so they were torn whether they should give their views or not. Still, practical experience matters. All those battles in the Rotted Lands caused me to level up a lot. Under the influence of my power leveling and other growth skills. I think the teacher is important, but they only take you up to level 30 or so. After that, it's all about our own real experience. I agree with Edna. As a druid, I needed to use my powers, and be placed in situations where I had to use my powers creatively. Those allowed me to gain levels. Combat, experimentation, and interesting situations seem to correlate with my leveling speed. But how does one create practical experience for nobles who are doing trade and governance? A business management school. Oh wait, it's essentially an MBA program, isn't it? Live experience is really the best. Those life-like dreams are second best. Ferris repeated. Nothing like spending time in the trenches to really grow. I see. How do I simulate town management for these young nobles? The program therefore needs a mix of practical experience. Perhaps they can play some roles in managing the newly reclaimed territories. We're in need of capable people to manage, and their noble skills would be a boost to the new lands. They bring with them the backing of their own home territories too. It came from Kavio. For Kavio, on top of diplomatic issues, he has been struggling to maintain the growing administrative requirements. New lands, new towns, all needed people to run them. It's hard to convince any decent ruler or mayor to make a move to a new land. But not so for these noble children, who are young and untested. The very fact that it's only a temporary assignment, as part of a holistic education program, could convince these young nobles to go willingly. So I could use the whole noble school to tap into their talents, and deploy them under the guise of school or college learning trips. I imagine having a blank slate would train their imagination and give them a challenge, and so they can level up. Alright, I had Trevor, Jasmine pull up the newly reclaimed lands that are still unmanaged or poorly managed, and decided that nobles would be sent to these lands. The students would be judged and rewarded based on their performance, and as a group. I wanted it to be a group event, because I understood that working in groups is a terrible, terrible thing, and it was this struggle against each other that would cause them to level up. Competition, especially direct, visible competition, is important. The first batch of TreeTree college students were of course rather shocked by the task. We're going to manage a new spot of land. Some of them were excited, some of them seemed afraid. Each group of 5 students will be accompanied by a merchant advisor, a military advisor, and a people advisor. Each of you are allowed to have an entourage of 2 people, and 2 bodyguards. The advisors are only there to give you comments and observations. The local citizens are ultimately the ones carrying out your orders, and you are expected to learn to lead and command the citizens. The challenge of the new lands would be a good place for young commanders to hone your skills. For safety, you will be accompanied by a squad of beetles. The students have not had such a task before. Each group will spend 6 months at their designated locations, and it will be a competition. The best group will receive a small reward. The worst group a punishment. There had to be a carrot, and a stick to every plan. If they took it, great. And off they went. Most of these lands were mostly sparse, where I've just reclaimed it from the Rotted Lands. Therefore, each group is responsible for a group of settlers, about 500 to 800, to set up a small village, plan defenses, and everything from head to toe. It's a safe arrangement, in the sense that my beetles would ensure the security of these lands. Their only challenge is the management of the village. I would graduate them to harder challenges where they would have to multitask both growth, people, trade and war as they mature of the 4 to 5 year program. On the research front, Horns and the labs developed a few additional upgrades for the assassin spiders and beetles. These were more stealthy forms, more anti-humanoid damage perks, more poison. At the same time, we were also working on more anti-air upgrades. We explored strange and silly ideas, like bungee spiders who would be shot at the flying monsters, attached with poisons and extremely durable vines and threads. The idea was to either disable the wings, or pull them to the ground with the threads. Throughout the Freshlands, armorers, blacksmiths, bowyers and fletchers were all busy. In a way, the entire world is a wartime economy, and the demands of war dominated the order books of the land's craftspeople. Arrows, ballistas, crossbow bolts, nets and slings, harpoons. We were preparing for the eventual arrival of these airborne demons. We trained rangers, and we set up more lookout posts. On the shores, where my giant attendant trees stood, we set up platforms where rangers and archers with farsight or similar skills could be on the lookout. It's likely that the demons would come from the eastern shore, but at the same time, a rift could easily open in our continent. So, we kept watch over the Rotted Lands too. The Valthorns and the Beetles increased their patrol frequency. So far, so good. All quiet on the central continent. But that's no guarantee. Where is the Demon King? For now, the social unrest and unhappiness is kept under the lid. My Eonic priests have proved their worth, quickly earning a spot as a regular feature in many smaller towns, and with them, a huge amount of aid. Wed got rid of many selfish lesser rulers too, though we tolerated corruption or lesser crimes in these lands. After all, the Freshlands Constitution, lesser local corruption and crimes are under the jurisdiction of the kings and nobility, though it still reserves the right for me to intervene as I see fit. If these rulers were fueling a rebellion with their conduct, then we would step in. It's usually just having the local ruler or lord relocated to another place in their land. Things we could still do, while being seen as respecting the local king's power and sovereignty. The priests would petition the king directly, with our observations and information, and that would usually be sufficient to sway them to see things our way. They too do not want a rebellion on their land. My priests are also a key funnel for future talent, either as Valthorns or as future priests, so it was important to constantly monitor them. I had one of the artificial minds under Jasmine dedicated to the task of observing the priest's conduct. Even if the nobles abused their power, I wanted my priests to be seen as good. Certain things should be out of bounds for men of faith. It was important that I reminded the priests that I am watching, because priests are in a unique position of power and trust in the society. For most part, I'd say 49 out of 50 priests were genuinely good people. But a religion's reputation is often destroyed by that single priest. It was the same for the patriarchs. They were people in greater positions of power, so another artificial mind was dedicated to observing their conduct and actions. I like to believe I can trust them, but everyone will be watched. From our observations, we would have a list of pointers which is then used to shape the School of Trilogy's education. Already we noted there's a lot of weakness in interspecies preaching and proselytizing. Most of the priests aimed and shaped their preaching and messaging to people of the same species, and they struggle to form a connection with someone of another race. An elven priest needs to struggle to interact with a centaur, or a dwarf, and harder still with a treefolk. There was a need to improve training and understanding of species-specific nuances. It would never be as good, but at the very least, they would be taught the key mistakes to avoid when dealing with people of another species. This was also a point that I wanted to put into the Treaty College's education, though their angle was more on trade preferences and diplomatic preferences of different species. Chapter 107 Faculty of the Commons. Year 136. The Demon King was still late. This was unusual, and we hear of great battles in the eastern continent. Even though there is supposedly an information embargo, there are still leaks. Great, incredible battles of archers and demon drakes. Of battles in cliff areas where warriors could reduce some of the demon drake's airborne superiority. Of great skill and classes. There's a class of Drakeslayer archers and Drake hunters that emerged from these battles. I would like to get my hands on some of those classes, but I suspect it'll be a matter of time. The world thanked their lucky stars that the demons are still confined in the eastern continent, despite being able to fly, and the rifts remained only in that continent. I wonder what's keeping them there. From the news, it certainly did not seem like the defenders were able to stop them from reaching the sea. Perhaps there are other factors. So, we focused on consolidating power, strengthening the Eonic priesthood across the Freshlands, deploying the young nobles on little adventures. They were pretty average as a whole, but the little outdoor adventure contributed a few levels to their Lord class. It's good progress for a few months outdoors, and they helped to stabilize these new territories. I'd also get a good sense of the type of rulers and managers these nobles would become. Whether they were kind, ruthless, rational, or emotional. In the same vein, although practical experience is indeed important, I wasn't about to tolerate the low levels of the TreeTree college's teachers and lecturers. I had ensured all of them had training of their own, in the form of monthly doses of Dream Academy. I hoped to improve their levels by a bit, putting them in the level 40 to level 50 range for at least a single class. They would be teaching young ones who are around level 10 or so when they start off, but because these are noble classes, the power of a level 10 is actually more like a level 15 to 20. This is especially pronounced with those of noble blood. Prince and princesses usually already have some secret hereditary skills, and their class itself is strong as its base. In a contest of wills, it's usually a matchup of the one's strongest levels and classes, not the cumulative total levels and classes. If the trainers and tutors are too low leveled in any one class, they won't be able to suppress or control the tutors. Ideally, I would want someone like Jura as the headmaster. His warlord class is a noble equivalent, and as such, nobles don't get an advantage against him. So I focused on training the tutors, and I also had taken a liking to one of the tutors. Thordrock, a bearded dwarven man who's in his late middle ages, a little plump and prosperous. He seemed every bit the old headmaster, and had the cranky, steely disposition to boot. He used to be a merchant, then he got too weary for all the traveling his class required, so he found this task of educating the next generation interesting. As a merchant, he had been to a lot of places, and fought a lot of bandits and thieves. Thordrock was a level 38 mining merchant, level 18 blacksmith, and level 20 axe warrior. In every sense of the word, the scattered levels meant he was close to capping out as a person, since level 80 to level 85 seemed to be the usual cap for normal mortals. For now, there was no single headmaster of the entire TreeTree college, and it is run as if the entire teaching staff is a council. Still, the problem is, once an individual hits a level cap, I can't really push his level higher with Dream Academy. Still, not entirely useless. If I could somehow trigger or force a class merger, then only the combined class would be able to stand toe-to-toe with the nobility classes. What do you think of taking the lead? I asked Thordrock one day. At that point they just returned from the students' expedition from the new territories of the entire TreeTree college. Well, yes, finally, someone needs to be in charge of this messed up school. He said. First, we need some booze in the school. Some of them are underage. Well, those underage ones have to just suck it. Thordrock laughed. Any good self-respecting noble who can't handle a drink's gonna be in trouble anyway. I lost count of the number of times nobles got their drinks spiked. Oh, that was too much info. All of these young'un need to learn how to drink, how to handle a drink, and how to handle stuff in their drink. Like me, I have spiked drink resistance. At the very least, they need to have poison detection. Ah. Thordrock laughed, then he asked again. Are you serious, Eon? What do you think this school should be? Other than exporting your politics? He asked. Yes. Tell me, what do you think this school should be? I didn't want to share my ideals, of course. I had a certain vision for it, but the locals mostly saw it as a way I was going to strengthen the Freshlands. Ultimately, unity. Thordrock said, as he rubbed his beard. Unity of the noble class, however limited and fickle that's worth. I saw this as a step to truly build a continental trade system, but in the past 1 year I've served as a tutor of these nobles. It is also a place for social bonds to be built among the noble class, which would foster more trade and industry. Where do you see me in this picture? Thordrock paused and he couldn't answer it. But I could read his mind. What am I supposed to say? Do I praise Eon? Or do I state the truth that he's seen as a benevolent tyrant? Or, I would appreciate the truth, Thordrock. I have no need for fickle praises. They do little for me. I don't know. A school founded by an immortal semi-divine being that's earmarked as a heretical existence. Just thinking about it makes me need a mug, so I rarely do think about it. But if this school wants to exist, it better damn well train some good, capable, competent nobles. Define a competent noble. What is a good graduate student? What do you think a student who graduates from this school should be able to do? In a way, This was an interview whether he was suited for it. Thordrock paused again. One that can hold his beer, makes a good deal, can set up a working, functioning town, and is able to defend itself from its enemies. I paused. That certainly fit the defensive noble. No part of values or principles. The hell with that. Thordrock laughed. The things I've done to get a deal. Ah, he has loose morals. I wonder whether I wanted to create little Machiavellians. Thordrock continued. We all want to live. 8. Look at me. I paid bribes to not get killed. I paid bribes to run away from hot zones. I paid adventurers to die so that I may live. Principles ain't gonna cut it. Not when there's a monster in front of me. I bit. I begged. I knelt where I needed to. There was a part he didn't say. And right now, you're the biggest powerhouse on the continent. If not you, then who? I paused. He clearly has swaying loyalties. Should I still use him, then? Or someone else? There's this entire Freshlands, home to so many people, surely I can find someone who has the experience to lead a school. Or do I have to make one myself? So, I had to look a little harder. Maybe someone who isn't high profile, but is loyal. Quiet and unassuming, but gets the job done. Ah damn, thinking about it, I've fallen for the old trick of looking at the most visible candidates, instead of looking at it objectively. There must be someone who's quiet but I didn't notice because he's quiet. It's such a rookie talent management mistake. So what if they talk and are more visible? Talent and competence is not always visible. If you've done everything right, and everything works, it often seems like you've done nothing at all. The ability to troubleshoot and solve problems is only one aspect. It's even better if one is able to prevent problems in the first place. So, how do I spot people who are able to resolve problems before they even fester or become bad? Observation. I had to observe them and see how they resolved problems. How many steps ahead they did things, and how much thought they went into doing what they did. People who could balance thoughtful consideration, and yet take decisive action when the timing is right. This demanded a huge amount of processing power and observation, and it's made possible thanks to Patrick's special powers and my artificial mind's ongoing observation throughout my immediate valley. It required me to constantly monitor my candidates and rate them on a scale of various factors, like forward thinking, problem resolution ability, ability to work with multiple parties, communication, and even manipulativeness. All these needed multiple, hundreds of data points. Personality. These traits were especially true when looking for a person who's suited for trade and governance. To some extent, all traders plan. The very nature of a trader meant he had to be aware of market prices and changes, production data, and the ability to locate an opportunity, a gap. At least, that's what I thought. But it is not so. The present world rewarded merchants who took risks. Who just made a journey from one end of the continent to the other, with little information to work with. The presence of a system for traders, and the effect of various traders' skills meant some traders could make decisions based on hunch. Their skills would tell them where and what to do. I needed someone who wouldn't rely on their skills, at least not much. Or perhaps a skill that switches their disposition towards long-term thinking, despite the system's tendency of giving skills as mental shortcuts. Patrick and Jasmine took a few months to monitor how certain people behaved in context. Then, one day, Master, would you consider a young candidate who's currently an apprentice at a blacksmith? He's way too young to be a master of an academy of young little pain in the asses. But, I could start training him really young, then in a few decades he will be ready. So I decided to have a look. The young apprentice was a half-elf boy named Castua. Despite his youth, he had demonstrated a quiet focus on preventing and solving problems, so he's likable but doesn't stand out. It would be decades before he would ever be a master of the colleges. He seemed to like his work as a blacksmith apprentice, but I got Jura to speak to him. Hello Castua. Castua quickly bowed politely. Greetings, Council Jura. Juris no longer the council, but it seemed many still refer to him as such. It's one of those guarded politeness. Never know when a person of such power would take offense. It seemed Eon saw some potential in you, and would like to include you in training. Would you be keen? Jura wasn't exactly sugarcoating. What he plans for you, I do not know. The young boy's mind instantly had a lot to think about. Yes. Jura paused. I will give you some time to think it through. Yes. He repeated. No need for the time. My answer is yes. Jura nodded. Very well. Eon will speak to you when the time is right. Castua was not the only one. It was against our nature to put all eggs in one basket. A tree made many, many seeds. I needed multiple candidates across all age. bands, so that I had a solid talent pool for proper succession planning. I wanted someone who had that kind of personality, and also faith. The levels and technical ability was something I could work on. So, on top of Castua, we soon located 4 to 5 more people of various ages whom we think have potential. They are mostly young, and are under. Still, I wanted an adult of sufficient stature to lead the school. Else it's just a council of teachers that doesn't seem able to make any big decisions. Is doing something better than doing nothing? Should we still tolerate Thordrock as a caretaker principal? I asked the artificial minds, at first. He is of the right age and has generally good skill, even if his loyalty is a pragmatic one. Jasmine agreed. We will monitor him. The role of a caretaker principal does not require absolute loyalty. A pragmatic, cost-benefit type of personality may be appropriate. Disagree. This is about molding the minds of the next generation of mid-tier managers. Trevor used some terminology from my memories. They should be expected to have absolute loyalty. It is expected. I paused, and considered it. In some ways, the risk is rather nuanced. Having a principal with nuanced and pragmatic loyalty may result in students picking up a similar view of loyalty. That's a risk in the long run. But then again, even if I picked a loyal principal, that may not result in loyal future leaders. Would a principal's influence be that pervasive? Is this a false choice? After all, loyalty is a mutable thing. I could, by my own actions, transform someone who is pragmatically loyal into entirely loyal, and vice versa. The concept that loyalty is for life surely an impossible thing, unless their minds are constructed in such a way. Are there any other candidates? Those capable and with the right skill sets would not want a task to corral these noble children in the first place. So in a way, this wasn't exactly a coveted job. It's new. If anything, it's more important that this newly set up institution does not fail. I went back to Thordrock again. Do you have any ideas on how to improve the Treaty College? Thordrock paused and then answered. In truth, most nobles do not run their lands alone, and often as merchants, we deal a lot with their adjutants and secretaries. So, I believe each noble student should be allowed to sponsor a few of their adjutants. A noble's success, I dare say, is also quite dependent on capable subordinates. That sounds like an officer school. But that's already what the Valthorns Academy focus on. Combat, tactics and all. But I suppose Thordrock's point is towards the bureaucracy. Currently, in this magical world, paperwork and administration is inconsistent. There are no consistent laws, processes or papers, and merchants have to navigate all of them, often paying little bribes and incentives along the way. Even now the entirety of the Freshland is a complicated mess of laws and regulations, because in part of laziness and my distaste for this sort of work, and also I didn't want to force the entire country to obey one single set of laws. Each of these segments brought with them different cultural norms and I had expected to let them run their own kingdom, in the way a federation delegates certain areas to the states. In that, every noble is a minor master of his own land, and so each of them developed their own versions of the law, so all in, it's a hodgepodge of different rules and regulations. But a lot of these can be smoothed over, if the officers and staff of the nobles all communicate, essentially forming a de facto organized unified bureaucracy. Like trade can be more efficient when there's less paperwork to be filled. There are a lot of low-lying fruits to be made as a whole. Like why is the merchant's warehouse located in some inaccessible area instead of somewhere convenient for the convoys? Like why are goods not sorted properly? So many mundane areas that need someone to just spend them time to clean up and organize. Essentially, what Thordrock wanted was to make the merchant's life easier, supplement the nobles with capable subordinates. It's also a good way to transition from a feudal society to a more modern society, since it maintains the nobles' position as a ruling elite, and yet delegates out decision-making and administration to commoners. It's also a less controversial way of opening up a wide range of education to common folk without unnecessary noble resistance, since these common folk will be tagged to their noble employers. But then, would Thordrock's influence result in administrators that are pro-merchants instead? I decided to look at all the nobles' subordinates, whether there were any good teachers. This would take a while too, on top of all the other searches that I've been doing. The artificial minds need time to process and assess the nobles, and also the various departmental offices. At the same time, by allowing these administrators come in, would that not create the noble commoner dynamic that I wanted to avoid? Unless I separated them. But pragmatically, a segregated school is worse. In fact, my initial idea of a school for commoners is essentially elitist because that also implies there is a separate school for elites. The relationship between commoners and nobles could go either way, but in any case, I'd like to see these commoner administrators graduating and eventually run my future commoners' school. It's a rare time where it's good that I am a magical tree. I am seen as outside the whole noble commoner class system. If I were human, I would most likely face greater resistance. Let's do it. So, the TreeTree College opened up spots for the noble vassals to join. The pitch to the nobles were simple: they needed competent subordinates to carry out the details and the gruntwork. Studying together gave commoners insight into the noble mindset and thought processes. I understood this felt like a caste system, but if I want to slowly supplant and dismantle the noble structures, I'd have to have a bureaucracy capable of operating with noble oversight and direction. The initial weeks were rocky. There were some incidences of harassment, and so I had insisted that no bullying was allowed, and used my artificial minds to keep watch. Students are only allowed to fight and attack each other during combat practice. If necessary, I would use my own abilities to break up any fights. The commoners came in many ages. Some were the old servants and butlers of the nobles, strangely chosen to accompany their young masters to school. At first, I thought whether I should restrict the school by age, but I decided since it was the first year, I'll let it go. I would introduce age limits in the later years. Not everyone likes change. Some need to have it in little pieces, ease them into it. Some like to a big bang change. But from what I've observed, change needs to be slow. A big bang change tends to create a larger and more immediate resistance. Slow, gradual change is akin to boiling the frog. By the end of the year, the nobles have mostly accepted the presence of commoners as fellow students, even though most of them still feel themselves as a superior class. It's fine. Boil the frog. Slowly. Chapter 108: Inception of the Matriarchs. Year 137. The Demon King finally descended. Demon King Raja Naga has arrived. As the rifts predicted, he arrived in the eastern continent, and he quickly made his presence felt. The entire eastern continent was in a state of war, as giant fire-breathing lizards and flying drakes ravaged the entire continent. A time of war. Lausanne is in the eastern continent. A message for Jura to Lofen. She instantly broke down and cried. She's not dead, but she can't get out. Lofen wept, and I could see her feelings through Patrick. Worry, helplessness, anger, sadness. She wondered whether she was going to lose her daughter. She was far away now, and I can't reach her from here. Not when she's on another continent. There's no way Jura could get there either. There's no boat or ship fast enough, and unless we have the hero's teleportation array, I can't get anyone there. She just went back to her home and just cried for a while. Some of the other ladies of a similar age from Freshka, her friends, came to comfort her. Jura, on the other hand, was just sad. She wouldn't do anything stupid, right? Jura asked. I don't think so. Lausanne certainly didn't seem like the type to do anything stupid, but I don't know how much has changed in the past 30 years she's been away. She may have changed. Yeah, she won't. Jura said, but I could tell from Patrick's data that he's worried too. But there's nothing much we can do. Not when she's on another continent. I could only hope she's wise enough to stay away from actually confronting the Demon King. Very few have done that and survived. The Demon King's presence sent the Rotterdlands into a frenzy. More demonic hybrids spawned, and the trade routes experienced more frequent attacks. But for now, the Valthorns and Beetles have managed to hold them back, so the trade routes hold. A great relief, for our allies who feared for the worse. The expansion and training of Valthorns, priests and young nobles continued. Just because the Demon King arrived, didn't mean we have to change anything. Alright. Demon King spawned. As nobles, what should you do? A lecturer, a former retired mayor, asked the crowd of young noble students. There were some commoners mixed in too, the attendants. Prepare for war. Well, yes. But how and what? What should you prepare? The lecturer asked. Food supplies are a common one. During demonic attacks, trade routes are frequently disrupted. Some of this is basic common sense, but no one actually sat down and put a manual for dealing with Demon Kings 101. In some ways, this is a first step to that manual. I also had the instructors write down key teaching points for storage. Bit by bit, my library was growing, even if I didn't get skills for it. Next up is actually village defense. Demonic forces tend to attack places of large populations first. It is said they have an ability to sense living individuals, particularly large numbers. Of course, no one knows whether this is true, or they detect large cities by other means. The crowd of nobles go ooh. So, theoretically, It's better to focus defense forces in larger cities, since villages tend to be skipped, or only attacked by smaller forces. Unless they are so unlucky that they happen to be in their path. The commoners winced at those words, wondering whether those villages will be left to die. The nobles just nodded in agreement. This sounded familiar. I didn't pay much attention to the classes, since no untoward incident occurred. As the borders saw more fighting, I've awarded more upgraded classes to the Valthorns. For anti-air, I am really quite dependent on my beetles and spiders, and also my higher-leveled Valthorns. The Valthorns had many practice rounds against flying foes, and I used my Dream Academy to give them more practice and dream battle experience against aerial foes. Many of them woke up sweating and needed a separate dream for them to rest. Dream Academy allowed me more control over the contents of the dream, though it's still just a set of parameters I could control. I don't even know what exactly they see in those dreams, until recently. Because Tree over Mind allowed me to gain an insight to the effects of Dream Academy, the two abilities essentially allowed me to view the dreams in almost real time. There was still a small time lag, but I could see how each and every Valthorn had a slightly different variation of the dream. The dreams itself tapped into their minds to bring up the desired effect. Now, could I essentially stitch their dreams together into a mini matrix? Patrick. Possible, but I believe that will take up a lot of processing power. But it can be done. I think I can put about 30 people together. Great. Dreams have always been personalized. It's time to go full mini matrix and inception on my Valthorns. Now, is it possible to create a time dilation effect, such that the dreams feel longer than the actual elapsed time? That would require some kind of super stimulant into their brains, Master. Patrick was frank. Not my area of specialty, but I believe it should be possible to create a sap or chemical that increases brain activity, and thus allow them to process more within the same period of time. So, when I called Jura, some of the Valthorns herbalists and druids and the senior Valthorns for a meeting, they were rather strange. That sounds like something quite dangerous, Eon. A senior herbalist responded. There are some herbs and spices that supercharge the mind, but they tend to leave one feeling exhausted subsequently, and can be addictive. Wait, this sounds like dealing in drugs. I thought Kavio had some of those. Relaxants. A druid casually said, and the other druids glared at him. Oh, never mind. Procure them for me, I declared. Maybe I could use them differently, or administer their effects differently. I already have psychedelic dreams. What could go wrong with another different kind of drug-like ability? It's really the dream, I believe, to invent that medical superdrug that significantly heightens one's senses and mind. Nootropics are smart drugs. Perhaps the easier method is to suppress all the other forces that prevent learning and leveling, Master. Patrick suggested. Maybe we can try with just experimenting with a dying man, and just maintain their mind. Oh, to do my own brain in the jar experiment. Would a brain in the jar gain levels? Is it still living? Can it hold a soul if its entire body is artificially supported? And what point, if we remove a body, that the body and soul part ways? Like, if I just keep the head and the boy, would the soul still stay around? Which organ is necessary, and which isn't? Eon, may I inquire what this is for? Ferris asked. Obtaining these herbs can be a rather troublesome thing. I don't see why. Am I not above the law of the land? Ah, that is true, but as it is, the planting and cultivation of such herbs are outlawed and most nobles forcibly destroy them, due to their damaging effects on societal productivity. Then, can you just send it to me instead of destroying them? Indeed, but most nobles would want to know what is being done to them. Have the nobles deliver it to me personally, then. I need no more than a few samples to complete my analysis. I will say it is for analysis, then. Yes, that is fine. I noticed Ferris' mind was still turning. Certain herbs are dangerous, especially for nobles. Some herbs have been used to incapacitate, poison or weaken nobles, and many nobles viewed such herbs as a threat, so they have been firmly destroyed. It's due to its effects on the mind, bordering on mind control, that scared the nobles. So throughout the world there had been numerous movements pushing for the destruction of such herbs, and even till today, there are noble groups dedicated to eradicating these mind drugs. It was said the origins of the movement started after the emperor or a large empire was drugged and mind controlled by his concubines. It was only when the children and princes rebelled, confronted, and the emperor was finally on his knees that they realized the extent of the concubines' mind control. Since then, nobles everywhere have been extremely wary of new types of herbal substances. Of course, there is an opposing movement, those who use these drugs to supplement their own abilities. But, they do so quietly. Jasmine, can you help me locate these substances? Since it's hidden, I would need your eyes and ears. Certainly, Master. More kingdoms capitulated and changed sides. They've realized that the four temples were not backing down from their blockade, and that the divine edict meant the priests and Templars would enforce the blockade with much greater attention. By now, more than 2/3 of the kingdoms on the continent have formally switched sides, including many of the Harrison splinter kingdoms. They are still squabbling and fighting smaller wars with each other, but they are now all formally FFA-aligned nations. It's kinda like I've become this massive umbrella for all of these little countries, since there are no benefits from staying loyal to the temples. This merely strained the load on the school of Theology further. Already, it is difficult to coordinate my artificial minds and the priests. I couldn't train priests fast enough. The 10 patriarchs and matriarchs are overloaded with administering the school of Trilogy, and with thousands of young priests and priestesses undergoing training, it's really tough. I tried to assist by appointing more Eonic senior priests to help with the management of the Trilogy school. Actually, Eon, maybe we should be given some time to use our skills in a non-school setting. A patriarch actually prayed one day and said, "Oh, you have not been doing that. All 10 of us have been working on the Trilogy school ever since it started." I paused and considered the issue. Indeed, it's been some time since then. Many of us have abilities and powers, and though we labor hard at work in the school and Freshka, we do dream of visiting our new allies. I agreed. So, first, I pulled together the senior priests, and those that have performed well. I defined performing well as those that were able to train new priests to a high level and guide them, or priests who were able to perform their social tasks and convert large groups to my cause, without relying too much on material rewards and lies. Even doing this assessment took a month, but eventually I appointed 5 more patriarchs and matriarchs. This time, 3 of them were treefolk, 1 was a centaur and one was a human. With the appointment of 5 more, I then implemented a rotational shift. 5 of 15 patriarchs will be traveling to spread the faith, on 2-year shifts. That meant, over the course of 6 years, all 15 patriarchs and matriarchs would have had their stint in the field. Like my young nobles, these experienced priests also need to stretch their legs and see how things are in the lands outside. Things may have changed. On the side of the FTC, we've increased the admittance to the college. With more new allied kingdoms, it was important that they show some proof of their alliance. So, essentially, sending their young children to the FTC, so far away from their home kingdoms, is meant to be this act of trust. It's also leverage. At the same time, we've expanded recruitment of instructors from all these new allied nations too, to cater to a growing student population. Freshka, the capital of the Freshlands, is a large university town home to 3 large educational and training institutions. Once this whole setup stabilized, I intend to set up satellite campuses and branch campuses for the School of Trilogy and FTC, like how Valthorns have mini bases throughout the Freshlands and my allied kingdoms. The Valthorns, being a military wing, always had multiple forward bases for attacks into the Rotted Lands, or various peacekeeping and social order assignments. These are centered around a main, giant attendant tree, a relic of my earlier New Freaka days. The Valthorns always had giant trees as forward bases. They also act as recruitment centers and training centers, for orphanages that were previously under the Valthorns and Valtrian Order's jurisdiction. It's ironic. Not long ago, in the days of New Freaka, I told kings and royalty, no special privileges and no special area. Now, I even set up an entire school to brainwash, re-educate their children. Maybe some hero from my world would notice that this entire college setup is nothing more than a glorified luxury grade re-education and rehabilitation center. I suppose life, even in a world of magic, has a way of playing tricks. Still, the presence of so many young nobles and their entourage brought incredible economic vibrancy to Freshka. Various shops and merchants set up branches and offices to cater to their every whim: luxury restaurants, luxury goods, tutors and trainers, blacksmiths and craftsmen, all made good money serving young, impressionable nobles looking to impress and show off to each other. It's also a good way to stimulate the flow of money and trade from these faraway nations to the Freshlands, as these faraway kings and queens would have to send stipends, pay for sustenance, pay for their servants. Sending money through such long distances in the age of magic still required a network of merchants, people who were willing to trade goods, and so on. Often, merchants would make arrangements to sell goods to kingdoms, and the merchants also acted as their means to remittance agents. At times, it was amusing to read the thoughts of these young nobles. At other times, it was just grating. Still, a school life for the rich and powerful emerged, along with their attendants. Along with it, came clubs, and little fraternities. Some were on racial lines, like a club for human nobles, a club for elven nobles, a club for tree folks. Most of the smaller, less common races formed a combined club of their own. Also, I made Thordrock as vice-chancellor of the FTC, despite his rather shaky loyalties. I needed someone now, while I still trained my pipeline of future chancellors, and gave him a set of guidelines to follow. I rather liked his pitch about unity of the central continent. ID also put him through a few trips to Dream Academy. I had hoped to merge his classes together, but instead he just unlocked an additional tutor class. It'll take a while, I suppose. Still, he really did started on the whole booze and wine appreciation and tolerance classes. There's even booze, wine and whiskey clubs, and it seemed battle lines were drawn. The wine club members had nobles from more conservative, old families, and would view the other two as uncultured. The whiskey club seemed to be more urban wealth, comprising the children of many lords and kings from major trading hubs, while the booze were more of the rest. I suppose I added to the fire when we challenged all three clubs to make the best herbal-infused alcoholic liquor. Herbal beer, herbal wines and herbal whiskeys. As the year drew to the end, the Demon King's destruction of the eastern continent continued. The Demon King resembled a large twin-headed demon dragon with two massive wings. It had a wide range of elemental attacks. Lofin's still asking for more news on Lausanne, but we don't have many informants, and Lausanne's not contacting us. But I still sense my connection to the possession of the devoted, and the drain on my star mana. So she's alive. The key is really avoiding the Demon King. As long as she continued to stay away from the Demon King, she'll be fine. I told Lofin that much, that I still sense her presence and that my familiar is still connected to her. For now, the Demon King's mostly wrecking the eastern continent. Where the hell are the heroes? Maybe the heroes will be summoned in the eastern continent too. Or would that be a bad thing, for them to be summoned there and face a full-powered Demon King, when they are underleveled? But if they spawn outside of the eastern continent, would the Demon King follow them? Or maybe, it can't see them when they are still low-leveled, like how the earlier heroes managed to dodge the Demon King. I am betting next year. Jura said. Maybe the gods haven't got ready yet. I don't see why they need to wait so long. They didn't have to summon new heroes for 40 years, surely some of their power recharged. That's speculation on my part, of course, that gods need to have their powers recharged. It's entirely possible that their powers work in weird ways. Chapter 109 Kindred Spirits. Year 138. 10 heroes were summoned. Immediately, I told my artificial minds to look for them. If they spawned anywhere on the central continent, I want to be the first to know. This time, the 10 heroes are new, and I want to play a bigger role in molding them, as my spear, and as my shield. If they survive, they will be my future allies, and will supply me with more Titan souls. It took a few days, but it was Trent who spotted a strange-looking young lady fleeing from the Rotted Lands. She appeared as hybrids chased her. After she ran past the line of trees, beetles emerged to fight off the hybrids. These beetles were assigned to protect the trade routes from the hybrids' incursions. This is the suspect, Master. Trent quickly highlighted the presence of the young lady in recognizable Earth-like clothing. She wore a dress and she had a watch. She was panting. This was nostalgic, somewhat. I quickly asked Jura, Edna and Ferris to go meet her, and bring her back here. Who are you people? She asked when she saw elves and centaurs approached her. We're from the Valtrian Order, a military organization of the Freshlands. Jura smiled. He put up his best diplomatic face. We've been asked to escort you back to Freshka, our capital. It's a much safer place than this outpost on the Rotterdlands highway. What if I say no? We can't stop you, and we won't take you by force. But I can promise you that we won't harm you. I am sure you are confused and lost, and this is too much to take in. Those words suddenly made her cry. She was hungry, tired, and all that. We'll feed you and help you. A bath, some new clothes and equipment too, if you need it. Jura said. Both Edna and Ferris stared at him. They were not stupid, and they quickly realized this lady was a hero. She soon agreed. During the trip back to the capital, Jura stayed next to her and ensured she was properly fed and cared for. She had a lot of questions. Jura answered some, but for quite a few of them, Jura answered. I understand you have a lot of questions, but I am afraid I don't know enough to answer it. Our master and spiritual leader, Eon, will take your questions. It made her slightly suspicious, but the express beetle ride brought her back from the Rotterdlands highway to Freshka in under a week. During the trip, she was amazed at how the scenery changed once they got out of the Rotterdlands. Vast lands of green, cities and people of all races and species. Then, Freshka itself. We housed her in a special building deep in the Valthorns fortress in Freshka. It's a standalone building, purpose-built to accommodate future heroes. I envisioned that I would require such places a while back, so, with Harris' help from back then, we built a place tailor-made for reincarnated or isekai-ed heroes. That meant magical items that resembled familiar, Earth-like equipment, like microwave ovens which operated on magical heating stones, hot showers, spring mattresses, and a decor that resembled Earth. She cried for a moment, and quickly jumped on the mattress. She slept for half a day. So, where are you taking me? Our spiritual leader. She frowned. They brought her to a temple within the Valthorns fortress itself, surrounded by multiple tree of prayers. In it there's a giant attendant tree. You will hear a voice in your head once you step inside. Jura nodded. The tree had a meeting room, but essentially, it was me and her. Hello, I said to the girl. Her leg immediately buckled and she quickly sat on one of the chairs in the room. I could read her thoughts. It's a mess. Are you one of the reincarnated heroes? She paused. No. She said her name was Astia, but Patrick's mind reading soon revealed her real name was Stella. Huh, she doesn't trust me, I suppose. It's not good to lie. Your foreign attire, and that watch on your hand gave your otherworldly origins away. She panicked. Okay, yes. Are you alone? Yes. I think those that came with me, they are far away. Wait, I just noticed she looked a bit older than the previous generation of heroes. She was in her early 20s, though she does look really young for some reason. She seemed to be working in a school, saving money for college. Did you get a divine blessing? Sort of. See, when I died, I wasn't meant to be in the bus. It was those words, I suddenly felt a sense of dread wash over me. Was Astia, like me, an accident? He said that I was collateral damage, but somehow I had enough merit to be reincarnated in this world with some benefits. So where are the heroes? And, great, the gods are biased. Was I really such a piece of shit that they made me a tree? He said that things will be hard at first, but it'll be okay if I survive. Stella sat on the chair. But he gave me a blessing. Late bloomer. Really funny. Admins, really funny. I still don't know what it does. She sipped on the tea. I always had tea for guests. It's a thing, and it helped to calm my guests down, make them talk a bit more. But I was told by Jura that you can answer my questions. So, what the hell is happening? Can I go home? To the best of my knowledge, you have to die to go home. Not guaranteed. I answered plainly. She instantly frowned and almost cried. Where am I? Well, you're in a world with demons and heroes. A demon king appeared recently, and so the heroes, those kids you saw on the vehicle, they are the heroes. No. Go back a step. Is this a game? No. As far as I know, this is real, and you've died and now you have been brought here. She's starting to annoy me. Then why am I still in this same human-ish body? Can't I get reincarnated as something else? Also, is it better to just die and go back? She said, but I think her last question was meant for herself. Do you have a class, young lady? I got one while running away. Scout, level 1. She wasn't lying. She didn't get the hero class either. Scout is an average class, though it does lead to pretty good upgrades. Do you get to choose your class, Astia? No. I just got it. I can say no, though. The fact that she doesn't get to choose her class, like most of the other mortals indicated that she really isn't a hero. In fact, it's because the lack of direct choice in classes, that's why class seeds are valuable. Most mortals and locals have to keep doing a particular ability and pray the system somehow grants their desired class to them. The ability to get a particular class just by eating a fruit is really awesome. That said, for the common classes, the system is very generous, and has been seen to grant them out frequently. Do you want your class? Yeah. You're not a hero, and as far as I know, there are no ways of going back unless you die. So the question is then, what do you want to do in this world? Astia sat and couldn't answer. I don't know, really. It's not like I had the time to figure out what I want to do with my life when I am running from weird monsters. Now I am talking to a big magical tree that speaks to me in my head. I know nothing at this point, so how can I even decide? Ah, the lost soul. How quaint. It's certainly annoying that those who do not have the god's blessings are lost and clueless. Those who are heroes are driven by divine compulsion. Well, ask away. I'll try to answer what I can. Then perhaps you can think of where you want to go. Can I be God? Astia asked immediately. Then I can open a portal home. Possible. The domain type skills seem to suggest that is very possible. Do you know what kind of magic brought me here? No. But if I were to guess, divine magic. As far as I know, only the gods can send someone so far. As far as you know. Astia sat. How long will I live? Without magic, your mortality is unchanged. With magic, maybe up to 300 to 500 years. Can I get classes based on what I know back home? Possible. In fact, you should certainly try it. The heroes generally get classes from the gods, with little choice of their own. I was honestly giving a tip. Then I want to be a master chef. She said. I want to eat good food, and make good food, and I want a restaurant. I am gonna be more famous than Gordon F. King Ramsay. Then I am gonna have a restaurant that travels the world, and then, I am gonna have a magical door that leads me back home. I certainly applaud your imagination. I am joking. She sagged. Her boost to high energy vanished abruptly. I don't know what I want, actually. How many classes can I get? Humans generally can have up to 6 active classes, but I am not sure whether that applies for other worlders like yourself. Perhaps you can get more. Since I am not a hero, will you still feed me and let me stay here? Good question. I did intend for the housing to be designed for heroes, but here is an earther who isn't a hero. Kind of like me. Possible, of course. I am really stuck here, isn't it? And I was just looking forward to college. You know what? We have 3 schools here. The Valthorn Military Academy, the School of Theology, and the Freshlands TreeTree College. Seriously. The girl frowned, and then laughed. Sorry. Those are quite stupid names. Couldn't help myself. Never mind. If you are interested, I'll ask one of the Valthorns to give you a tour. I mean, or would you rather be outside? Okay. She perked up. But I think I'll just go to the academy and the TreeTree College. Being a priestess is so, I would later discover that my tea's effects on her behavior was a lot more pronounced than I had expected. I heard from Eon that you're not a hero. Edna said quite plainly, and Astia just paused. I didn't know that was possible. To think the gods could err, some of the Templars would kill you the moment they know about you. Astia's face paled. But worry not, as of this moment, everyone thinks you are a hero, and I've been designated as your bodyguard and guide. Edna shrugged. Oh, I am sorry for causing you such trouble. Astia's emotions suddenly crashed. Edna paused. She wasn't expecting that response. There was a period of silence. Both of them didn't say a word, but eventually Edna had to do her job. Here's some protective charms and items. This is a defensive shield ring, and this is an anti-poison weapon. This is a small druid summoning charm which calls for animals nearby to come to your aid. Astia still looked apologetic. It's alright if you don't want to help me. Edna ignored it. These charms are not powerful, but they will keep you alive if something happens. Really? It's alright. Is she emotionally alright? Let's go on the tour. I don't want to go now. Edna paused. Sorry. I want to just stay here. Edna was told not to push her too hard, so she shrugged and just let her sit there. I told her to send her back to me, for a little trip into the biolab. Astia, or Stella, had a normal physique, at least from what little I could see, but it was clear within a few weeks of her stay in Freshka that she was, at random triggers, suddenly turned emotionally unstable, and had episodes of depressive behavior. The tea helped to make her calm and seemingly normal for a while, but then, it would later cause an emotional crash. I had thought I could send her to one of the colleges, but then, I think she needed something else. I didn't quite know how to help her. The locals generally have rather positive mental outlook, they are quite hardy and seem to be able to take some degree of abuse and suffering. So it was possible to use my powers to make them stronger. Those who are young have been constantly guided by the influence of my trees and my energies, and so, the degree of correction I needed to do for those exposed to me usually were minor. For Astia, my issue was that I fear that directly interfering with her mind, or lacing her with all kinds of drugs and saps, or using dreams to change her, would possibly be counterproductive, or trigger other kinds of issues. She seemed rather far off base that I wasn't sure whether my usual means of alteration would work. It's like trying to mentally correct a blood mage. Still, I placed a tree of prayer near where she lived, and ensured that the effects of the calming trees drain away the erratic elements of her behavior, and even then they seem to flare up unpredictably. With the locals, it's like steering a ship and charting a course from the day it set sail from the harbor. With Astia, I discovered a ship stranded at sea and all of its navigational equipment confused and probably broken. I summoned my council for a discussion. To be fair, Eon, someone with such an attitude or emotional weakness would have died. This is not a nice world, and if the other worlders hesitate, dilly-dally, or are weak, I believe it's quite clear that the monsters, the demons, or just those less pleasant will get to them first. They either become strong, or die. Yvonne had the most dire of assessments. I wonder how she made it out of the rotted lands. Adrenaline. This sounds like a city disease, the malaise of the large capital cities. One of the patriarch explained. She needs faith, more than anything else. Perhaps she also needs to spend more time in the company of the faithful, and some time alone with nature. Through faith, and through being one with nature, one can heal one's soul. It is a soul disease, in a way. But am I trivializing depression and emotional disorder to say it is a soul disease? The priest may have a point. There are multiple ways one can achieve a step out, or at least, make an improvement. I need a psychologist and a psychiatrist. Or at least, someone I can consult who has a more modern perception and understanding of this issue. They may sound sensible, but who knows whether their suggestions may be counterproductive. I am essentially trying to deal with modern problems, but with magic and skills. I may get it very, very wrong. Are you trying to make me better? Astia asked randomly. I paused, and it was then I could read her jumbled mess of thoughts. No, not really. Just trying to understand what's happening. Good. Everyone thinks they can make me better. Astia fidgeted and moved about. But maybe I don't want to get better. She's stuck in a hole, and she thinks she doesn't want to get out. Meanwhile, the devastation in the eastern continent continued. Though the heroes have been summoned, our weakening contacts seem to suggest that they spawned on the other continents instead. If the Demon King started moving, it may pass by the central continent, and that would be bad for me. The Demon King, the twin-headed dragon demon, seemed content to dominate the eastern continent. Lausanne, thankfully, still lived. I can still sense her, however distant she is. We don't know what's happening with the heroes, with our intelligence network crumbling. It's hard to feed and pay for informants when all trade is blocked behind a blockade. The navies of the four temples are still relentless, though quite a bit of Hawa and Ivan ships have returned to the eastern continent. My next project should be to build a naval force able to break out of this encirclement. In a way, this is the four temples, the existing global powers, attempting to curtail my rise to power. On the central continent itself there are a few large naval or maritime kingdoms, and they suffered greatly from the reduction of trans-ocean trade. So, it wasn't difficult to sway them on my side. They are weak, and now, we're going to commission them to build a new fleet of ships. The Valthorns had to quickly move there, to set up a mini-naval academy. Fighting at sea, running a ship. All these things are very new to the Valthorns, who never had any experience fighting at sea. It seemed I too, have very little experience of my own, though, from the process of harvesting the souls of the dead, there is a decently sized repository of knowledge. That's all conventional warfare, fighting the wars the same way the temples do. At the same time, I was thinking, how can I do this Navy thing differently? Would it be possible to build Walker-class battleships, with long-range bombardment abilities, or large living ships that hosted a swarm of flying beetles or animals, like a mini-aircraft carrier? Essentially, the Navy must act as a limb, a means of force projection, to bring the battle back to the four temples' homelands. In the same way, they can be used to push and suppress demonic forces in distant lands. Or could I have floating trees? Living, floating islands like a massive Zeratin. I would like to find turtles massive enough to carry my trees. Turtle trees would be like amphibious carriers, wouldn't it? Am I contributing to the escalation? The locals escalated this war with the hex bombs. The demons retaliated with long-range bombardment cannons. Now we have flying demon drakes. The next step should therefore be more long-range weaponry, and space-based weapons. Or mobile sea fortresses able to punch through the blockade and keep it open. But even if I break the blockade, the countries outside, on those other continents, they would refuse to trade with me. What can I offer them, with me being so far away, that could sway their views? A big gun. Once I do have a large naval fleet, would I be able to force them to open up, gunboat diplomacy style? In this game of geopolitics, was peace ever an option? A big gun is necessary, even if just to force them to the discussion table. Chapter 110 Popcorn. Year 139. The heroes made the journey to the eastern continent. This was propaganda, at least. Miss Stella. Oh great, you're there. Where are you? Are you all right? One of the heroes asked via a long-range spell, some kind of secured messaging spell service. Astia, our Stella was surprised, but she somehow quickly put on a face. Oh, nice to see you again, Tom. How are you? At this point, Patrick's mind reading revealed more information. She knew most of the kids that died with her. She was an administrative assistant at the teenagers' school. She was acting the role of the nice, supporting administrative teaching assistant. I am good. I think. Are all of you together? I could sense her forcing herself to make this conversation. Oh, some of us are in the southern continent, and some of us are here in the north. But we're all planning to meet in the eastern continent. We're heroes after all, so we got to do what we came here to do. That's good. Miss Stella, actually we just wanted to check whether you're okay. I mean, after that time with the gods, we, parted ways. Where are you, Miss Stella? I am actually in the central continent, in the city of Freshka. The cursed continent. Are you sure it's safe? Are they doing something dangerous or harmful? I hear they eat children there. The heroes quickly said, "At shit. What kind of propaganda the temples have been feeding the heroes?" Stella smiled. I could sense she's forcing herself to do it, but she's also quite good at acting. Really? Yeah, you should get out of there. The heroes said, "It's not safe for you." Oh, Stella acted blur. I feel maybe I am in a safe part of town. I should be fine. Where are all of you going? Are you safe? We're fine. We're going to fight the Demon King, and we have all these powers. We've been fighting some regular monsters for a while, and we're strong. Ah, is that so? Good luck. Okay. Take care, Miss Stella. We'll come and get you once this is all over. All right. Goodbye. Astia breathed a sigh of relief once the magical video call faded. She quickly curled up back in her bed. That act of hers consumed quite a bit of her mental energy and she needed a nap. How did she even manage to hold a job at school is still a strange thing to me. The quality of news we received from the other continents steadily declined. We're just getting generic news snippets, propaganda and such. Things that we can gather from a typical inner tavern. The heroes arrived in the eastern continent after a month-long magically assisted journey, and began fighting the flying demons. By now, rumor said the eastern continent had lost 50% of its population to the demonic attacks, and another 20% have been driven into hiding, living in underground networks. Again, really, is this propaganda? It's not really our problem, isn't it? The nobles of the central continent said in a meeting. We formed another council of sorts. Personally, I'd like to call them the Nation of Tree Friends, but they are not actually friends, just temporary allies due to targeted abandonment and neglect by the four temples. If the Demon King stays on the eastern continent, that's good for us. We have our own problems to deal with, and now with the blockade, there's even less reason for us to care. They've targeted us, so why should we volunteer any assistance? A fair sentiment, one which I feel for. Some of the nobles delighted in the fact that the Demon King kept its domination on the eastern continent. They felt like this was punishment for their actions. When the central continent faced Demon Kings, have the other continents extended their aid? The nations that do, I can count them, less than my branches. A treefolk noble complained. Treefolk nobles were strange existences, they resembled mini tree ants, and they were quick to switch allegiances to me, once it was clear that the temples no longer wanted to help them. A strange moment of speciesist behavior, even if it's in my favor. So, let the eastern continent burn. I feel for the period, but the decisions of the rulers have consequences. Is this how it feels like, to watch a terrible war unfolding across the sea? It's a bit like me, watching an attack on foreign soil on television. It's not my problem. Too bad for them, and serves them right. It's been a few years since the FTC started, and we finally had the first batch of graduates. It took a little longer than expected, but the star student was a young noble from the northern part of the central continent. A young mixed dwarven man, he started the program as a level 3 lordling, and ended the course with level 19 lord, level 6 knight, and level 10 merchant. A good start, and the growth was pretty good for 4 to 5 years worth of work. Especially the lord class, which had conditions of the student doing ruling things, like making decisions about the land and development. Still, I wonder how the experience seed worked when one has multiple classes. Does the level go to the class that they want? The experience seed clearly is overpowered in the sense that it gave a guaranteed level up, regardless of levels. Which was why I've been hoarding it forever. The drawback, of course, is that levels don't always cover the weaknesses of real battlefield experience. Anyway, back to the young dwarven lord. As promised, I granted him a special class seed, a trade lord class, a merger for lord and merchant class. If he took it, it would almost guarantee the merger of the two classes. He could, of course, give it to someone else in the family, and that person would start with level 1 trade lord. The dwarf ate it immediately, despite his family's objections. There was some complicated family tussle for power in the background, something I didn't care for. It was a typical, useless son suddenly excelling in life and now family wants to claim his success. He was, in other words, the fourth son who the parents thought was going to be a spare of spares, and now doing well. After his graduation, he approached Kavio and the Freshkin councils. I'd like to work for the council and manage land on Freshland's behalf, instead of attending to my family's holdings. They couldn't decide, since matters of land assignment, especially new lands, was usually my prerogative. I approved a small parcel. It's a rough, recently reclaimed piece of land, with hardly any population. This young lord would have to lead and build it from scratch, but he seemed to take it positively. This very act, though, seemed to have stimulated the appeal for the Freshlands Treaty College amongst the younger sons and daughters outside the regular line of succession. A chance, by merit, to earn their own lands. On top of other existing ways of being a knight, achieving merit in combat, and have the king award some new piece of land. I suppose I made the family drama worse, but some internal competition is always necessary. It's a shit job, Edna said to Ferris. The group of upgraded classers had some sort of a monthly drinking session. It was quite a big group. Ferris just shrugged. She clearly isn't normal, though. The things she knows are very strange. Thank goodness I can rotate with the other Grand Knights. I'll go nuts if I stay with her too long. Is Eon giving her some herbs? I heard the patriarch tried using some skills on her, but didn't seem to really work. Edna said. She's like a child. Sometimes. You're not older than her, though. She looks about the same age as you. Ferris teased. But yes, I get what you mean. She's like someone who's afflicted with a curse or magical trauma. The kind you've seen when something really bad happened. But it's different. Edna complained over a mug of beer. They are both approaching their early 30s now, and are good friends, because both of them are first-generation upgraded classers. What does Eon want to do with her? Ferris asked. Did Eon tell you? Or it's just babysitting because she's from the same world as the heroes? Edna shrugged. Lovies, the spearmaster, just nodded. I'd never imagined that the gods could summon someone who wasn't a hero. Luckily this was the Valthorn's private bar, deep within the Valthorn's keep. Everyone here was a Valthorn. Indeed. More so if it's an accident. Edna sighed. She herself said her presence in this world was an accident of the gods. Gods can make mistakes, too. Ferris shrugged. I wonder whether that'll get included into the tome of Eonic commandments that the Pentadikarches are compiling. The group of upgraded classers collectively groaned. If you don't mind me being absolutely honest, that's honestly the biggest piece of ass-kissing I've ever seen attempted. One of the Grand Knights present said. What else do priests do, other than sing praises of the deity? Lovies retorted. Just smile and nod, and we laugh at the way they venerate Eon. Is that what the Outer Circle nations are saying? Edna asked. The Valthorns internally categorize the neighbors into circles, in the same way trees have rings. The Freshlands itself is the heart, the immediate neighbors the Inner Circle nations, and those further out, the Outer Circle nations. Again, it's an academic exercise. There are many, many ways to slice and dice the classifications of nations and their relationship with us. One could use race to quickly make classifications too. For example, the treefolk nations, however small they are, have a far higher natural loyalty to the Freshlands than the rest of the nations. This is simply because the tree folks, whenever they are in the presence of the tree of prayer, or any of my trees, can quickly sense my power flowing through the ground, and so they do not doubt the extent of my powers. On the other hand, the human nations are a lot more wary, since they had a longer history of believing in the four temples. A familiar visitor came. She even had the scythe. The druid hunter. We meet again, Eon. Lethia was an old lady, now in her 90s, but to me, She looked like she had not changed much in the past 40 years. Most likely the influence of her class, so her aging is slower. She was the executioner of the Huden Council. The Huden Council, now a far smaller entity they once were. Many of them died during that long period of the Rotted Lands, and the growth of the Freshlands and Valthorns also gradually whittled down their influence to a much, much weaker self. After all, with Ferris, my great druid, and my group of upgraded druids, the Huden Council no longer has a strong claim as the best place to learn the druid's craft. She visited the Valthorns' keep, and was granted an audience with the Valthorns. They quickly sent her to a special area where I had a few tree of prayers. I suppose it's strange, but would you consider employing me? I thought about it briefly. Yes, but not as a hunter. You shall be one of the Valthorns' military trainers. She accepted. Funny that our paths cross again, after decades. Glad to see you are still alive, Executioner. Jura smiled, and the ages have been kind. You certainly don't seem like you've aged, unlike myself. I am pleased that you still remember me, Council Jura. Lydia bowed slightly. They sat in a small cafe in Freshka itself. But that's rich coming from an elf with a naturally long life. I believe I saw Councillor Yvonne, as well. She's a principal, now. Jura sipped on tea. And certainly, one must remember the person who waltzed into our town and killed 4 druids publicly. Lydia gave a gentle, grandmotherly smile. So, tell me of the Huden Council. How have they fallen so far? To lose even their most feared executioner. It followed the typical path, really. Greed, incompetence, arrogance and overconfidence. Lydia shrugged. How could druids compete with a few great druids anyway? Even our most senior, archdruid, as but one person, and certainly the way of the druids in the Huden is haphazard, messy, very much unlike the structure of the Valthorn. Some would say such is the proper way of nature. I have heard that the Huden says the way we train our druids is artificial. Quite like a farm, rather than the wilderness. So they say. Lydia nodded. But in the face of the demon kings, a farm's speed is superior. The large number of competent druids can churn out every year means the Valthorns can lose 10 for every one we train. The archdruid may be a damned good druid, and I respect him for that, but he has failed to lead us through the constant, regular monsoon of the demons. Then what brings you to join us? I heard from Eon that he agreed. I may be old, but I too wanted to see for myself this blend of faith and institution and might. They are times in legends of yore that individuals must recognize the men and the creatures that change the world. I would never picture you as the kind that could be inspired by legends, Executioner. They both chuckled. Well, do you like what you see? Too early to tell. Back on the TreeTree College, the commoner's presence is now undisputed. However, there clearly is a large social gap between the noble-born children and the commoners that joined them. This was because the TreeTree College is in function, a tertiary college. There's a certain level of understanding that is implied, and for commoners, they lack this baseline knowledge. Unlike the Valthorns, who are educated from young, and unlike the priesthood, where the priests themselves do the task of educating them on the ways of faith, the FTC went right into management, military affairs and economics. Quite a large bunch of the commoners who enrolled didn't even know how to write, so they couldn't even self-study if they wanted to. Most of them, as they are sponsored by the nobles, also have to run errands for the nobles, so the amount of studying time they have is actually very limited. Some didn't know things like mathematics, and have limited knowledge of the world outside of their tasks. When I opened up the slots for commoners as well, it seemed most of the nobles just nominated and sponsored their minders to help them. In some cases, some nobles appointed minders who knew how to read and write so that they can take notes. In most cases though, the nobles generally just appointed either bodyguards who knew how to fight, or just regular maids. This wasn't the intention, of course. I wanted an administrative class. A bureaucracy. These commoners struggled really hard. In a way, they reminded me of my friends who had to work full-time jobs, and study part-time. Sure, there's some learning, but somehow it's just not as effective or immersive as a full-time education. It didn't help that the trainers themselves are so used to educating nobles, that some don't even bother helping their fellow commoners. So this gap in output also created and amplified the sense of superiority that the nobles had. I had to intervene, so I quickly demanded that Thordrock added commoner-specific remedial classes, meant to teach them the basics of reading, writing, language, and maths, which he did. As the year approached its end, I wondered whether the heroes are making progress. I hope they did. We honestly didn't have much information. The blockade was a pain, and the
Navy still needed more time. Building warships and training sea-capable soldiers was taking far longer than expected. So what if we broke through the blockade? If none of the other countries wanted to trade with us, what is the use of breaking through the blockade? We needed a strategy that looked past that, so, the first thing was, we needed a way to communicate with the other kingdoms on all those continents. Some may be open to trade and communicating with us discreetly, and ways to make trade happen. Alternatively, if we do break through the blockade, we must have a naval force able to transport a sizable army to capture and hold a port on one of the other continents. Only from there we can then restore communications in our intelligence network. On a fine day, near the end of the year, Evans Lake has died. You received a fragment. Agnes Ang has died. You received a fragment. Soraya Mahmood has died. You received a fragment. The heroes are not doing well, are they?